At 3 in the morning in Florence, Elena Rossi crouched in the darkness of her bathroom, hand clamped over her mouth to silence her ragged breathing. The apartment door shuddered under violent kicks. Adrian had found her. 6 months of running, hiding, reinventing herself, all for nothing. With trembling fingers, she fumbled for her phone and typed a desperate message to her friend. "He's here. I need help. Now." She hit send just as the doorframe began to crack. Then her phone lit up with a reply from an unknown number. "Hide. I'm coming." Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd sent the message to the wrong person. If you're drawn into this story of survival, danger, and unexpected salvation, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The first time Elena Rossi realized she'd made a terrible mistake, she was standing in her Turin apartment with a split lip and Adrian Falco's cologne still clinging to her skin like a warning she should have heeded months earlier. "I didn't mean it, baby," Adrian had said that night, his voice honey-smooth as he pressed an ice pack to her swollen mouth. "You know how I get when I'm stressed about work. You pushed me too far, Elena. You know I love you." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd actually believed him. That was 8 months ago, in what now felt like another lifetime, before the bruises became harder to hide, before the apologies started ringing hollow, before she understood that love wasn't supposed to leave marks that lasted for weeks. The second mistake Elena made was thinking she could leave Adrian Falco without consequences. She'd planned her escape meticulously, the way someone might plan a bank heist or a prison break, because that's what her relationship had become. A prison with invisible bars made of threats and manipulation, and Adrian's unshakable conviction that she belonged to him the way someone might own a piece of furniture or a favorite coat. On a rain-soaked Tuesday in March, while Adrian was away on one of his mysterious business trips he never explained, destinations he never shared, Elena had stuffed 2 suitcases with everything that mattered. Her grandmother's jewelry, her passport, the emergency cash she'd been squirreling away in a tampon box for 6 months, and the battered copy of Italian folktales her mother had given her before the cancer took her. She'd left her phone on the kitchen counter, still plugged into the charger, left her laptop open with a half-finished email to her sister, left the television playing a rerun of some mindless cooking show. She'd wanted Adrian to think she'd just stepped out for groceries, that she'd be back any minute. Instead, Elena Rossi disappeared. The woman who stepped off the train in Florence that evening bore little resemblance to the one who'd boarded in Turin. Elena had chopped off her long dark hair in a train station bathroom, the silky waves Adrian had loved to run his fingers through now lying in a trash can somewhere between cities. She'd dyed what remained a mousy brown, bought thick-framed glasses she didn't need from a pharmacy, traded her fashionable clothes for plain jeans and oversized sweaters that hid her figure. She'd become a ghost of herself. Intentionally invisible, purposefully forgettable. In Florence, Elena rented a tiny studio apartment in a building that had seen better days, located in a neighborhood where people minded their own business and asked no questions. The landlord, a wizened old woman named Signora Benedetti, had barely glanced at Elena's forged identification documents before handing over the keys. "First and last month plus deposit," Signora Benedetti had rasped, her cigarette dangling from cracked lips. "No pets, no parties, no trouble." "No trouble," Elena had promised, and she'd meant it with every fiber of her being. She'd found work at a small cafe called Il Sogno, the Dream, tucked away on a quiet street that tourists rarely discovered. The owner, a perpetually harried woman named Francesca, had hired Elena on the spot when she'd mentioned she spoke 3 languages and didn't mind early morning shifts. "You start tomorrow at 5, Francesca had said, wiping espresso grounds from her hands onto her apron. "You know how to work a commercial espresso machine?" "I'll learn," Elena had replied. And she had. She'd learned to pull perfect shots of espresso, to steam milk until it was silky smooth, to remember the orders of the regulars who shuffled in before dawn seeking their caffeine fix. She'd learned to keep her head down, to smile politely without inviting conversation, to be helpful, but unmemorable. For 3 months, the system worked. Elena woke before sunrise, worked her shift at Il Sogno, returned to her apartment, and spent her evenings reading or teaching herself new skills online using the cheap laptop she'd bought from a pawn shop. She'd changed her routines constantly, took different routes to work, shopped at different stores, never established patterns that could be tracked or predicted. She'd started to breathe a little easier, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd actually escaped. Then Lorenzo Valenti walked into Il Sogno on a humid morning in late June, and Elena's carefully constructed new life began to crack at the foundations. He wasn't the first customer that morning. That distinction belonged to old Signor Moretti, who came in at precisely 5:47 every day for his macchiato and cornetto. But Lorenzo was the first customer Elena actually noticed, really noticed, in the 3 months she'd been working there. He was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with dark hair that was just slightly too long to be purely professional, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they landed on. He wore an expensive suit that somehow managed to look both impeccably tailored and slightly rumpled, as if he'd been wearing it for too many hours. There was something about the way he moved, economical, purposeful, like someone who never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. "Espresso," he'd said when Elena asked for his order. "Doppio, no sugar." His voice was deep and measured, with a Florentine accent that suggested he'd grown up here, not transplanted like Elena. She'd made his espresso, her hand steady despite the odd flutter in her chest. Anxiety, she'd told herself, just anxiety because strange men still made her nervous after months of Adrian's volatility. Lorenzo had left a generous tip and departed without another word. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Always ordering the same thing, doppio espresso, no sugar. Always arriving around the same time, just after the early morning rush had subsided. Always sitting at the same corner table with a newspaper that he didn't seem particularly interested in reading. By the end of the first week, Elena had noticed he was watching her. Not obviously. Not in the leering, predatory way that made her skin crawl. But she'd spent enough time being hyper-aware of her surroundings, constantly scanning for threats, that she recognized when someone's attention kept returning to her more often than random chance would explain. "Your corner table regular is here again," Francesca mentioned one morning, nudging Elena with her elbow. "Handsome, isn't he? And well-dressed. You should talk to him." "I'm not interested in talking to customers beyond taking their orders," Elena had replied, keeping her voice light. "Suit yourself," Francesca had shrugged. "But if you don't make a move, I might. A man who looks like that and tips like he does? That's a catch." Elena had said nothing, but unease had settled in her stomach like a stone. The watching continued. 3 weeks of Lorenzo Valenti appearing at Il Sogno, ordering his espresso, sitting at his corner table, and observing Elena with those dark, assessing eyes. Then one morning, when the cafe was empty except for the two of them, he spoke. "You're very careful," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet space. "You take a different route to work almost every day. You never use a credit card, always cash. You don't have social media accounts, at least not under the name Elena Marchetti." Elena's blood turned to ice. Marchetti was the surname on her forged documents. Her hand had frozen halfway to the espresso machine, and she'd forced herself to turn slowly, meeting Lorenzo's gaze with what she hoped looked like confusion rather than terror. "I'm sorry?" she'd managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Lorenzo had stood, moving with that same economical grace, and approached the counter. He'd stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. "My name is Lorenzo Valenti," he'd said, "and I know you're not who you're pretending to be." The cafe had seemed to tilt around Elena. Her vision had tunneled, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, grab her bag, abandon her apron, flee into the Florence morning, and disappear again. "I don't know what you're talking about," she'd said, but her voice had trembled, betraying her. "Your real name is Elena Rossi," Lorenzo had continued, his tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "You're from Turin. You've been missing for 3 months, and the man you're hiding from is Adrian Falco." The world had stopped spinning. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this stranger who'd just demolished her entire carefully constructed facade with a handful of sentences. "Who are you?" she'd whispered. "What do you want?" "I want to help you." "Help me?" Elena had laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. "By telling me you know all my secrets? By proving that I'm not as invisible as I thought? That's not help, that's—" "Adrian Falco is already looking for you in Florence," Lorenzo had interrupted, and the quiet certainty in his voice had cut through Elena's rising panic. He's been asking questions, showing your picture around, the old picture from before you changed your hair. But he's smart, and he's persistent, and it's only a matter of time before someone recognizes you anyway. Elena had gripped the edge of the counter to keep herself upright. How do you know this? How do you know any of this? Because I know who Adrian Falco is, Lorenzo had said simply. I know what he does. I know the kind of man he is, and I know he doesn't let go of things he considers his property. I'm not property, Elena had snapped, anger briefly overpowering fear. I'm a person. I left him. I have every right to— You have every right, Lorenzo had agreed. But rights don't mean much when you're dealing with someone who doesn't respect them. And you do? Elena had challenged. Respect rights? Respect boundaries? You've been watching me for weeks, learning my routines, investigating my background. That doesn't exactly scream respectful. Something had flickered across Lorenzo's face. Not quite regret, but acknowledgement. You're right, but I needed to be sure before I approached you. Sure that you were who I thought you were. Sure that you were in danger. Sure that you weren't part of Adrian's world by choice. Part of his world? Elena had repeated, her voice sharp with confusion and fear. What world? Adrian works in imports and exports. He said he— She'd stopped, reading the expression on Lorenzo's face. He doesn't work in imports and exports, she'd said slowly. Does he? Not the legal kind, Lorenzo had confirmed. Elena had sunk onto the stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly unreliable. What does he do? What is he really? Adrian Falco runs a significant portion of the cocaine trade through northern Italy, Lorenzo had said, his voice quiet but clear. He moves product from South America through Turin and Milan. He's violent, connected, and very good at making problems disappear, including people who cross him. The cafe had swum around Elena. All those business trips, the expensive gifts, the mysterious phone calls Adrian would take in another room, speaking in low, terse tones. The men who sometimes visited their apartment, hard-eyed men who'd looked at Elena like she was furniture, present but irrelevant. I didn't know, she'd whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, Lorenzo had said. You're a civilian. He kept you separate from the business. But that doesn't mean he won't use every resource he has to find you now that you've left. Why do you care? Elena had asked, looking up at him with exhausted eyes. Why does any of this matter to you? Are you police? Interpol? Some kind of— I'm not law enforcement, Lorenzo had said. Then what are you? Lorenzo had been silent for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes. I'm someone who understands what Adrian Falco is, and I'm someone who doesn't believe you should have to spend the rest of your life running from a mistake you made in choosing the wrong man. That doesn't answer my question. It's all the answer I can give you right now, Lorenzo had replied. What matters is this. Adrian will find you eventually. When he does, he won't come alone, and he won't be reasonable. You need protection, real protection, not just a fake name and hair dye. And you're offering that protection? Elena had asked, skepticism and desperation warring in her voice. Why? Out of the goodness of your heart? I have my reasons. That's not good enough, Elena had said, standing up, finding some core of strength she didn't know she still possessed. I spent 2 years with a man who had secrets, who told me partial truths, who expected me to trust him blindly. I won't do that again. I won't put myself in someone else's power without knowing exactly what I'm agreeing to. Lorenzo had studied her for a long moment, and Elena had seen something like respect in his eyes. Fair enough, but right now you need to make a decision because Adrian's people have been seen in the Santo Spirito neighborhood. That's 2 districts away from here. You're running out of time. Fear had clutched at Elena's heart. Santo Spirito. She'd walked through there just yesterday, browsing the market stalls, feeling almost normal for the first time in months. What do you want me to do? She'd asked quietly. Let me help you, Lorenzo had said. I have resources. I have people who can watch your apartment, track Adrian's movements, keep you informed. I can arrange better identification for you if you need to disappear again. I can— In exchange for what? Elena had interrupted. Nobody offers that kind of help for free. In exchange for nothing, Lorenzo had said, and something in his voice had made Elena believe him. I'm not Adrian Falco. I don't keep people through coercion or debt. If you want my help, you have it. If you don't, I'll walk away and you'll never see me again. But you should know. If you refuse, you're on your own. And Adrian Falco doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. Elena had stared at this stranger who somehow knew everything about her. This man who'd watched her for weeks, who spoke of drug trafficking and protection as casually as someone might discuss the weather, who offered help without demanding anything in return. Every instinct she'd honed over the past 3 months screamed not to trust him. But every survival instinct she'd developed during 2 years with Adrian told her she needed help, that she couldn't do this alone anymore. If I say yes, Elena had said slowly, I need ground rules. I need to know you won't try to control me, won't tell me where I can go or what I can do. I need to know that if I want out, I can walk away. No threats, no consequences, no making me feel guilty for choosing my own path. Agreed, Lorenzo had said immediately. And I need to understand what you are, Elena had continued. Not law enforcement, you made that clear. So what? Private security? Some kind of, I don't know, vigilante? Lorenzo's mouth had quirked in something that might have been amusement under different circumstances. The situation is complicated, but I can tell you this. I have significant resources in Florence. I have people who owe me favors. I have connections that span both legal and illegal enterprises, and I have personal reasons for wanting to see Adrian Falco's reach limited. Personal reasons? He hurt someone I cared about once, Lorenzo had said quietly. I couldn't stop it then. I can stop it now. The admission had hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that Elena hadn't expected. Okay, she'd said finally, the word feeling like stepping off a cliff into darkness, hoping there was something solid below to catch her. Okay, help me. Lorenzo had nodded once, all business. First thing, you need to vary your routine more. Stop coming to work at the same time every day. Francesca will understand if I explain the situation. But you're going to tell her? Elena had asked, alarmed. Francesca Benedetti is my aunt, Lorenzo had said. She's the one who called me 3 weeks ago and told me there was a skittish young woman working morning shifts who might be running from trouble. She wanted me to check on you, make sure you were safe. So yes, she'll understand. Elena had blinked, processing this information. Your aunt? My mother's sister. The cafe has been in the family for 40 years. So you didn't just randomly walk in here, Elena had said slowly. This was all, what, a setup? My aunt was worried about you, Lorenzo had said. She has good instincts about people. When she described how you acted, I had suspicions. So I investigated, and I found out exactly who you were running from. Elena had wanted to be angry at the manipulation, at the fact that even here, in her carefully chosen hiding place, she hadn't really been anonymous at all. But mostly she'd just felt tired, bone deep, soul tired, in a way that came from months of constant vigilance and fear. What happens now? She'd asked. Now you go about your day as normally as possible, Lorenzo had said. But tonight, I'm going to have someone watch your apartment building. You won't see them, but they'll be there. And I'm giving you a phone number. He'd pulled a card from his pocket, plain white, with just a number printed on it. This reaches me directly, 24 hours a day. If you see anything suspicious, if you feel unsafe, if you just want to talk, you call. Understood? Elena had taken the card, the paper feeling heavier than it should in her palm. Understood. Good. Lorenzo had moved toward the door, then paused. Elena, for what it's worth, you were smart to run, and you were smart to hide the way you did. But you can't do this alone forever. Let me help you end this, not just postpone it. Then he'd been gone, disappearing into the Florence morning, leaving Elena standing behind the counter with a business card in her hand, and the terrible, fragile sensation of hope beginning to uncurl in her chest for the first time in months. That had been 4 months ago. 4 months of Lorenzo being true to his word, offering help without demands, providing security without strings attached. 4 months of Elena slowly, carefully beginning to trust that maybe not all powerful men were Adrian Falco. That maybe protection didn't have to come with a price tag attached. But Adrian had never stopped looking. Lorenzo's people had tracked his movements, reported his increasingly desperate searches. He'd expanded from Turin, sent people to Milan, to Venice, to Bologna. He'd offered rewards for information, threatened people who might know something, become increasingly erratic as the weeks turned into months, without a trace of the woman who'd dared to leave him. And then, 3 days ago, Lorenzo had come to Elena's apartment with news that had stopped her heart. "Adrian's in Florence," he'd said without preamble. "He arrived yesterday. We don't know where he's staying, but he's here, and he's asking questions." Elena had sunk onto her threadbare couch, all the color draining from her face. "How did he find me?" "We don't know yet. Could be luck, could be someone talked, could be he's just systematically checking every major city in Italy. But it doesn't matter how. What matters is that he's here, and we need to get you somewhere safe." "Where?" Elena had asked desperately. "Where's safe if he's already in Florence?" "I have a property outside the city," Lorenzo had said. "Completely off the grid, not registered under any name that could be traced back to me. I can have you there in an hour?" But Elena had refused. Refused to run again. Refused to let Adrian Falco chase her from yet another attempt at building a life. She'd agreed to let Lorenzo increase the security around her apartment, agreed to stay inside as much as possible, agreed to check in every few hours. She hadn't agreed to run. Maybe that had been pride. Maybe it had been stupidity. Or maybe it had just been exhaustion. Exhaustion at the prospect of disappearing again, of starting over again, of living in fear again. Whatever it had been, it had led her to this moment. 3 in the morning, crouched in her bathroom, the apartment door shuddering under Adrian Falco's rage, and her phone glowing with a message to the wrong number. Because in her panic, in her terror, Elena had grabbed her phone and pulled up her messages and typed desperately to the contact she thought was her friend Sarah, the only person besides Lorenzo who knew where she was. But her hands had been shaking, her vision had been blurred with tears, and she'd selected the wrong contact, sending her desperate plea for help to a number she didn't recognize, to someone who'd responded immediately with words that made no sense. "Hide. I'm coming." Now, pressed against the bathroom wall, Elena stared at her phone's screen, at the messages she'd exchanged with this unknown number. Elena. "He's here. I need help. Now." Unknown. "Hide. I'm coming." Elena. "Who is this?" Unknown. "Someone who can help. Where are you?" Elena. "Via Romana 47, apartment 3B. Please hurry." Unknown. 5 minutes. Stay hidden. 5 minutes. But it had already been 4 since that last message, and the pounding on her door had intensified, Adrian's voice carrying through the wood, slurred with alcohol and fury. "Open the fucking door, Elena! I know you're in there! I can hear you breathing, you stupid bitch!" A crash, the sound of Adrian's boot connecting with the door. The frame groaned, wood splintering. "You thought you could leave me? You thought you could fucking disappear and I wouldn't find you? I own you, Elena! You're mine! You've always been mine, and you'll always be mine!" Another kick, more splintering. Elena fumbled with her phone, pulled up Lorenzo's contact with shaking fingers, pressed call. It rang once, twice. "Elena?" Lorenzo's voice, alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" "He's here," Elena sobbed, her careful composure finally cracking completely. "Adrian's here, he's breaking down my door, and I sent a message to the wrong number, and—" "I know," Lorenzo said, and there was something strange in his voice, something like relief mixed with urgency. "I got your message. I'm 2 minutes away. Stay in the bathroom. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Elena's mind, sluggish with fear, processed this slowly. "You? But I sent it to—" "We'll talk about it later," Lorenzo interrupted. "Right now, I need you to stay quiet and stay hidden. Can you do that for me?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "Good. 2 minutes, Elena. I promise." The line went dead. In the main room, the door finally gave way with a tremendous crash. Elena clapped her hand over her mouth to muffle her scream as she heard Adrian stumble into her apartment, heard him knocking things over, his voice rising to a roar. "Elena, where are you, you fucking whore? Come out here! Come out here now!" Footsteps getting closer, the bedroom door slamming open. "I can smell you, baby," Adrian crooned, his voice taking on that sickly sweet tone he used when he was about to hurt her. "I can always smell your perfume, that vanilla shit you wear. You're here, you're close." Elena pressed herself further into the corner of the bathroom, making herself as small as possible, praying to anyone who might listen that 2 minutes would be fast enough, that Lorenzo would arrive before Adrian found her, that this nightmare would somehow end without her blood on these walls. The bathroom door handle rattled. "There you are," Adrian whispered. Then the world exploded with sound, heavy footsteps pounding up the stairwell, multiple sets of them, and a voice that cut through Adrian's laughter like a knife through silk. "Step away from the door, Falco." Lorenzo's voice, cold, controlled, absolutely lethal in its calm. Elena heard Adrian spin around, heard the confusion in his voice. "Who the fuck are you?" "I'm the man telling you to leave," Lorenzo replied. "Walk away now while you still can." Adrian laughed, the sound ugly and contemptuous. "You think you can order me around? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Adrian Falco. I know you move cocaine through Turin. I know you launder money through your import business. I know you've killed at least 3 people who crossed you. And I know you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life if you don't turn around and leave right now." There was a moment of silence, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Adrian's voice, low and dangerous. "That bitch is mine. She belongs to me, and I'm taking her home." "She belongs to herself," Lorenzo said quietly. "And the only place you're going is out of this building." "Make me," Adrian snarled. What happened next occurred so fast that Elena, pressed against the bathroom wall with her ear to the door, could barely track it. A scuffle, the sound of fists connecting with flesh, a grunt of pain that didn't come from Lorenzo's throat. More footsteps, suggesting Lorenzo hadn't come alone. Shouting, cursing, the unmistakable sound of someone being slammed against a wall, and then Adrian's voice, shocked and afraid in a way Elena had never heard. "You're fucking dead. You hear me? You're dead. I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you." "Take him downstairs," Lorenzo said calmly. "Make sure he understands that Florence is no longer welcoming to him." Sounds of struggle, of Adrian being dragged away, his threats fading as he was forced down the stairs and out into the night. Then silence. "Elena," Lorenzo called softly through the bathroom door. "It's safe now. You can come out." But Elena couldn't move, couldn't make her muscles obey her brain's commands. She sat there trembling until she heard the bathroom door open and Lorenzo crouched in front of her, his jacket torn, his knuckles bleeding, but his eyes gentle as they met hers. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I promise you, you're safe now." And finally, after months of holding everything together, of being strong and brave and constantly vigilant, Elena broke. She collapsed against Lorenzo's chest and sobbed, great wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside her. Lorenzo held her carefully, as if she were made of glass, and waited for the storm to pass. Elena didn't know how long she sat there on the cold bathroom floor, Lorenzo's arms steady around her while she shook apart. Time had lost meaning somewhere between Adrian's boot splintering her door and the moment Lorenzo's voice had cut through the chaos like a blade through darkness. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccuping breaths, Elena pulled back, suddenly aware of how tightly she'd been gripping Lorenzo's torn jacket. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I got your... There's blood on your..." "It's fine," Lorenzo said quietly, helping her to her feet with careful hands. "Can you stand?" Elena nodded, though her legs felt like water. Lorenzo kept one hand at her elbow, steadying her as they emerged from the bathroom into what remained of her apartment. The sight made her stomach drop. Her front door hung from one hinge, the frame completely shattered. The small table where she kept her keys had been overturned, her few belongings scattered across the floor. A lamp lay broken near the window, and there were scuff marks on the walls where Adrian had been slammed against them. "I'll have people here within the hour to secure the door," Lorenzo said, following her gaze. "But you can't stay here tonight. You can't stay here at all anymore." "I know," Elena said numbly. She moved through this wreckage on autopilot, picking up her grandmother's jewelry box from where it had fallen, checking that nothing was broken. "I know I can't." A man appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He glanced at Elena, then addressed Lorenzo. "Falco's in the car. Marco's watching him. What do you want us to do with him?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Take him to the warehouse on Via dell'Ulivo. Make it clear that if he sets foot in Florence again, the consequences will be significantly worse than a few bruises and a damaged ego. And if he doesn't listen, then we make sure he can't ignore us," Lorenzo said flatly. But give him the chance to be smart first. The granite-faced man nodded and disappeared back down the stairs. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat that still clung to the pre-dawn air. He won't listen, she said quietly. Adrian doesn't know how to let things go. He'll come back. He'll always come back. Not if he understands what he's facing, Lorenzo replied. He moved to the broken door, examining the damage with a critical eye. Adrian Falco is a dangerous man in Turin, but this is Florence. His connections don't reach as far here. His reputation doesn't carry the same weight, and now he knows you're not alone. What does that mean? Elena asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. What are you, Lorenzo? Really? You said you're not law enforcement, but you have people who drag drug traffickers away in the middle of the night. You have warehouses. You make threats that actually scare men like Adrian. She paused, her voice dropping. Are you like him? Lorenzo turned to face her fully, and something complicated passed behind his eyes. I'm not like Adrian Falco, he said carefully, but I'm not a civilian either. My family has been in Florence for 6 generations, Elena. We have businesses, some legitimate, some less so. We have influence. We have people who owe us favors and people who fear us. Does that make me like Adrian? Maybe in some ways. But I've never raised my hand to a woman. I've never used violence as my first solution. And I've never believed that another person could be property. But you have used violence, Elena said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, Lorenzo admitted without flinching. When necessary, when there was no other option. This world we live in, the real one, not the sanitized version most people see, it isn't kind to idealists. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to protect what matters. Elena should have been afraid, should have been running from this man who casually admitted to violence, who operated in the shadows between legal and illegal. But all she felt was a strange, bone-deep exhaustion and the fading echo of the terror that had consumed her just minutes ago. The message I sent, she said, changing the subject because processing Lorenzo's moral complexity was beyond her capacity at 3:30 in the morning. It was supposed to go to my friend Sarah, but somehow it reached you instead. Lorenzo had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. After I gave you my number 4 months ago, I may have taken the liberty of programming it into your phone under multiple names, emergency contacts, just in case you needed help but were too panicked to scroll through your contacts properly. You put your number in my phone without asking, Elena repeated slowly. I did. Under multiple names. Yes. Which names? Lorenzo cleared his throat. Sarah, emergency, ICE, and help. Despite everything, the broken door, the shattered sense of security, the reality that Adrian had found her and would keep finding her, Elena felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It came out slightly hysterical, edged with the kind of wildness that came from surviving something that should have ended differently. You're insane, she said. You're absolutely insane. I prefer thorough, Lorenzo replied, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. And given that my thoroughness just saved your life, perhaps we can table the discussion about privacy boundaries until you're somewhere safe. The laughter died in Elena's throat. He was really going to kill me, wasn't he, if you hadn't come? I don't know, Lorenzo said honestly. Adrian's unpredictable when he's been drinking, and rage makes people do things they might not otherwise do. But yes, at minimum, he would have hurt you badly, and taken you back to Turin, where you would have been completely under his control again. Elena shuddered. The thought of being dragged back to that life, to that apartment where the walls had felt like they were closing in day by day, where she'd learned to read Adrian's moods in the set of his shoulders and the tone of his voice, where she'd become a smaller, quieter version of herself just to survive. It was unbearable. I need to leave Florence, she said quietly. I need to disappear again, really disappear this time, somewhere he'll never think to look. Or, Lorenzo said carefully, you could let me handle Adrian Falco permanently. Elena's head snapped up. What does that mean? Permanently? It means there are ways to ensure he's no longer a threat to you. Legal ways, Lorenzo added, seeing her expression. I have contacts in law enforcement, people who've been trying to build a case against Adrian for years. If we can get evidence, testimony, proof of his trafficking operations, he'd go to prison for a very long time. You want me to testify against him? Elena said flatly. I want you to consider the option. You lived with him for 2 years. You must have seen things, heard things, conversations or meetings or business dealings that seemed off. Elena wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I tried not to see. I tried not to hear. That was how I survived. By being invisible. By not knowing too much. By not asking questions that might make him angry. I understand, Lorenzo said gently, and I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. But think about it. Because running again means spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. It means never using your real name, never reconnecting with your family, never building anything permanent because you might have to abandon it at any moment. Is that really the life you want? It's better than being dead, Elena shot back, or worse, being back with him. Those aren't the only 2 options. Aren't they? Elena challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like my choices are run or fight. And I'm not strong enough to fight Adrian Falco. You're stronger than you think, Lorenzo said quietly. You left him. You survived on your own for months. You built a new life from nothing. That takes courage most people don't have. Courage, Elena repeated bitterly. I was terrified every single day. That's not courage. That's just fear, with nowhere else to go. Lorenzo moved closer, his dark eyes serious. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Elena. It's being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've been doing that since the moment you stepped on that train to Florence. Before Elena could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs again. The granite-faced man reappeared, this time with another man beside him, shorter, wiry, with sharp eyes that cataloged everything in the room in seconds. Boss, the granite-faced man said, Marco wants to know if you're coming to the warehouse or if we should proceed without you. Lorenzo glanced at Elena. I need to deal with this. Matteo will stay with you. He gestured to the wiry man. He'll make sure you're safe while I'm gone. I'm coming with you, Elena said suddenly, surprising herself. Lorenzo frowned. That's not a good idea. Why not? Because I might be scared? I'm already scared. Because I might see something unpleasant? I've seen plenty of unpleasant things. Or because you don't want me to see exactly what you're going to do to Adrian. All of the above, Lorenzo said bluntly. This isn't something you need to witness. Maybe it is, Elena argued, feeling something hard and determined crystallizing in her chest. Maybe I need to see that he's not invincible. Maybe I need to stop hiding from the monster and see him for what he really is, just a man who can be stopped by other men. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. If you come, you stay in the car. You don't speak to Adrian. You don't let him see you. Understood? Why not let him see me? Because the worst thing we can do right now is let him know he still has power over you, Lorenzo said. The moment he sees fear in your eyes, he wins a little bit. Even if we have him outnumbered, even if he's the one in danger, your fear would feed him. I won't give him that satisfaction. Elena wanted to argue, but she recognized the truth in Lorenzo's words. Adrian had always fed on her fear, had seemed to grow stronger when she flinched or cowered. Denying him that satisfaction held a certain appeal. Fine, she agreed. I'll stay in the car. But I'm coming. Lorenzo looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Elena's expression must have convinced him it would be futile. All right, but we leave now, before the sun comes up. And you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. No arguments, no improvising. Agreed? Agreed. The warehouse on Via dell'Ulivo sat in an industrial section of Florence that tourists never saw. A neighborhood of crumbling factories and abandoned buildings slowly being reclaimed by enterprising developers and artists seeking cheap space. Lorenzo's warehouse looked like all the others from the outside, its exterior walls tagged with graffiti, its windows dark and empty. Inside was a different story. Elena glimpsed expensive cars parked in orderly rows, shipping containers stacked against one wall, and what looked like a functioning office space built into the far corner. But Lorenzo directed the driver to park in the shadows near the entrance, far from the pool of harsh light in the center of the warehouse where Adrian Falco was being held. From this distance, Elena could see him clearly, but couldn't hear the conversation. Adrian stood in the center of that pool of light, flanked by 2 large men who made the granite-faced one from her apartment look small. His face was bruised, his expensive shirt torn, and even from here, Elena could see the fury radiating off him like heat. Lorenzo touched her shoulder gently. Remember, stay in the car. No matter what you see or hear, stay put. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched Lorenzo walk across the warehouse floor with that same economical grace she'd first noticed months ago at Il Sogno. Watched him approach Adrian with no apparent fear or hesitation. Watched Adrian's face twist with rage as Lorenzo began speaking. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. Adrian gesturing wildly, shouting. Lorenzo standing perfectly still, unmoved by the display. The two men flanking Adrian moving infinitesimally closer, a silent threat. Then Adrian lunged at Lorenzo. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. But Lorenzo sidestepped the attack almost lazily, and one of the large men caught Adrian mid-lunge, slamming him back into his original position with enough force that Adrian stumbled. More words exchanged, Adrian's face growing redder, his gestures more frantic. Lorenzo's expression never changing, calm and cold as winter stone. Finally, Lorenzo pulled something from his pocket. It looked like a phone. He held it up, showed Adrian the screen. Whatever was displayed there made all the color drain from Adrian's face. Elena leaned forward, desperate to understand what was happening. She saw Adrian shake his head violently, saw him say something that made Lorenzo's expression harden, saw Lorenzo gesture to one of the large men, who pulled Adrian's arms behind his back and held them there while Lorenzo made a phone call. The call lasted less than a minute. When Lorenzo hung up, he said something else to Adrian, something that made the drug trafficker's knees buckle, made him sag in the large man's grip like a puppet with cut strings. Then Lorenzo turned and walked back toward the car, his face expressionless. "What happened?" Elena asked the moment he slid into the back seat beside her. "What did you show him?" "What did you say?" "I showed him photographs," Lorenzo said calmly. "Photographs of his trafficking routes, his money laundering operations, his associates, evidence that my people have been gathering for months. Then I told him that if he ever comes near you again, if he ever so much as speaks your name, that evidence goes directly to the Carabinieri and Interpol." "Will he listen?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Men like Adrian didn't listen to threats. They only understood power, and they always believed their power was greater than anyone else's. "For now," Lorenzo said. "Fear is a powerful motivator, and Adrian Falco is more afraid of prison than he is obsessed with you. But you're right. Eventually, the fear will fade. His ego will convince him that he's smarter than us, that he can find a way around the threat. That's why the photographs aren't our only leverage." "What else?" Lorenzo met her eyes. "The phone call I made was to Giancarlo Russo. He's a captain in the Carabinieri's organized crime division, and he's been trying to build a case against Adrian for 3 years. I just handed him enough evidence to secure search warrants, wiretaps, and surveillance. Within a week, Adrian Falco is going to find himself under intense scrutiny. And if he's as smart as he thinks he is, he'll be too busy protecting himself to worry about chasing an ex-girlfriend across Italy." Elena stared at him. "You planned this, all of this. You didn't just gather that evidence tonight. You've been working on it for months." "Yes," Lorenzo admitted. "Why? Why go to all this trouble for someone you barely know?" Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, looking out the warehouse window at Adrian's diminished form. "I told you before that Adrian hurt someone I cared about. What I didn't tell you was that she didn't survive. My sister, Julia. She was 19 years old when she got involved with one of Adrian's associates. When she tried to leave, when she tried to testify against them, they made sure she never made it to court." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "Lorenzo, I'm so sorry." "It was 8 years ago," Lorenzo continued, his voice carefully controlled. "I was 25, working my way up in the family business, thinking I was untouchable, thinking my connections and my name would protect the people I loved. I was wrong, and I've had to live with that failure every day since." "That's not your fault," Elena said softly. "Isn't it? I saw the signs. I knew she was scared. I told her I'd handle it, that she should trust me, and then I failed to protect her." Lorenzo finally looked at Elena, and the raw pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "So when my aunt called me about a frightened woman working at her cafe, when I investigated and discovered you were running from Adrian Falco specifically, yes, I planned. Yes, I prepared, because I wasn't going to fail again." Elena didn't know what to say to that. The weight of Lorenzo's loss, his guilt, his determination, it was almost too much to process on top of everything else that had happened tonight. "I'm not your sister," she finally said. "You don't owe me this. You don't owe me anything." "I know," Lorenzo replied, "but maybe I owe it to Julia's memory to make sure what happened to her doesn't happen to someone else. Maybe that's the only way I can live with the fact that I couldn't save her." The driver cleared his throat gently. "Boss, the sun's coming up. Where do you want to go?" Lorenzo seemed to shake himself, returning to the present moment. "My apartment," he said. "Elena needs rest, and her place isn't habitable right now." "I can go to a hotel," Elena protested weakly. "You could," Lorenzo agreed, "but my apartment is more secure and I have a guest room with a lock on the inside of the door. You'll be safe there while we figure out next steps." Elena was too exhausted to argue. She leaned her head against the car window and watched Florence wake up around them as the driver navigated through streets beginning to fill with early morning traffic. Bakeries opening their doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. People walking dogs, heading to work, living normal lives that didn't involve broken doors and warehouse confrontations and the kind of fear that left bruises on your soul. Lorenzo's apartment was in a converted palazzo near the Arno, all high ceilings and restored frescoes and windows that overlooked the river. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost surreal after the shabby studio Elena had been living in. "Guest room is down the hall, second door on the left," Lorenzo said, gesturing. "Bathroom is attached. There should be toiletries in the cabinet, and I'll have someone bring clothes that fit you later today. For now, just rest. You're safe here." Elena nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to do anything but follow his directions. The guest room was spacious and elegantly furnished, with a bed that looked impossibly soft after months of sleeping on a lumpy mattress in her studio. She locked the door as Lorenzo had mentioned she could, then sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened in the past few hours. Adrian breaking down her door, Lorenzo arriving like some dark guardian angel, the warehouse confrontation, the revelation about Julia. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Your apartment door has been repaired and reinforced. Your belongings have been packed and will be delivered to you by noon. You're safe now. Rest." Elena stared at the message. She should have been disturbed by the efficiency, by the fact that Lorenzo had people who could repair doors and pack belongings and arrange everything while she'd been driven across the city. Should have been questioning what kind of organization could mobilize that quickly, that smoothly. Instead, she just felt grateful. And so tired. She lay down on top of the covers without bothering to undress. And despite everything, despite the fear still thrumming under her skin, despite the uncertainty of what came next, she fell asleep within minutes. When Elena woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows at an angle that suggested it was late afternoon. She sat up slowly, disoriented, taking in the unfamiliar room before the memories came flooding back. Adrian. The broken door. Lorenzo's revelation about his sister. She found her phone on the nightstand where she'd left it. 4:37 p.m. She'd slept for almost 12 hours. There was a note slipped under her door, written in precise handwriting. "Food in the kitchen when you're ready. I'm in my office if you need anything. Take your time." Elena stood on shaky legs and made her way to the attached bathroom. Someone had indeed stocked it with toiletries, expensive brands, still in their packaging. She took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the grime of fear and violence, though she knew it would take more than soap to feel truly clean again. When she emerged, she found a stack of clothes waiting on the bed, jeans in her size, several shirts, undergarments, even socks and comfortable shoes. All with the tags still attached, all somehow exactly what she would have chosen for herself. She dressed and ventured out into the apartment, following the smell of coffee to a kitchen that was all marble countertops and high-end appliances. A covered plate sat on the counter with another note. "Reheat if needed. L." Under the cover was pasta, perfectly prepared carbonara, the kind she'd learned to make during her first weeks in Florence. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She was halfway through the meal when Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, looking significantly less polished than usual. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept at all. "You look terrible," Elena said without thinking. Charming as always, Lorenzo replied, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. How are you feeling? Like I slept for 12 hours and woke up in someone else's life, Elena admitted. Is that normal? After the night you had? Perfectly normal. Lorenzo moved to the coffee maker, poured himself a cup that he drank black and scalding. Your belongings arrived a few hours ago. They're in the guest room closet. I had someone check for tracking devices or anything else Adrian might have planted. You're clean. How thorough, Elena said, echoing his words from her apartment. I prefer to think of it as cautious. Lorenzo leaned against the counter, studying her. We need to talk about what happens next. I know, Elena said quietly. I need to leave Florence. Start over somewhere new. Maybe Rome or you stay, Lorenzo interrupted. And we end this properly. Elena set down her fork. We've been through this. I'm not strong enough to fight Adrian. You don't have to fight him alone. Giancarlo Russo called me this morning. He executed search warrants on 3 of Adrian's properties in Turin. Found enough evidence to arrest 4 of his associates, and Adrian himself is being brought in for questioning tomorrow. The case is building, Elena, but it would be stronger with your testimony. You want me to testify, Elena repeated, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. To stand up in court and tell everyone what Adrian did to me. To expose myself, make myself a target. To make sure he goes to prison where he belongs, Lorenzo finished. Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the Arno. The river flowed peacefully below, tourists walking along its banks, couples holding hands, the world continuing its normal rotation while hers spun out of control. Do you know what it's like? She said quietly, not turning around. To feel like your voice doesn't matter? To spend 2 years having your thoughts dismissed, your fears minimized, your reality questioned until you don't even trust your own perceptions anymore? That's what Adrian did to me. He made me small. He made me doubt everything about myself. And you're asking me to stand up in front of judges and lawyers and Adrian himself and speak, as if my voice suddenly matters, as if I suddenly matter. She heard Lorenzo move closer, felt his presence behind her, though he didn't touch her. Your voice has always mattered, he said softly. Adrian Falco tried to silence it because he knew how powerful it could be. But he failed, Elena. You left. You survived. You rebuilt yourself. That voice he tried to crush? It's still there, stronger than he ever wanted you to know. Elena closed her eyes against the tears that threatened. What if I can't do it? What if I get up there and freeze or forget everything? Or then you freeze or forget and we work with what you can give us, Lorenzo said simply. This isn't all or nothing. Every piece of testimony helps. Every detail you remember matters. And you won't be alone in that courtroom. I'll be there. Giancarlo will prepare you. We'll make sure you're protected every step of the way. Why? Elena turned to face him. Why do you care so much? And don't tell me it's just about your sister. There has to be more to it than that. Lorenzo met her eyes, and something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and honest that she hadn't seen before. Because in the 4 months I've known you, he said carefully, I've watched you be brave when you had every reason to give up. I've watched you build a life from nothing, show kindness to cafe customers, even when you were terrified, refuse to let fear turn you bitter or cruel. And somewhere along the way, making sure you're safe stopped being about Julia and started being about you. About the fact that you deserve to live without fear. About the fact that you matter, Elena Rossi. Whether Adrian Falco convinced you otherwise or not. The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Elena wasn't ready to examine. I need time, she said finally. To think. To decide if I can really do this. Take all the time you need, Lorenzo replied. But while you're thinking, stay here. Let me keep you safe. And when you're ready, whether you decide to testify or run or something else entirely, I'll help you. No strings attached, no expectations. Just help. Elena nodded slowly. Okay, I'll stay. For now. For now is enough, Lorenzo said. 3 days passed in Lorenzo's apartment like existing in a strange kind of limbo. Safe, but uncertain, protected, but restless. Elena spent her mornings drinking coffee by the windows overlooking the Arno, watching the city move beneath her while she remained suspended above it, separate from the normal flow of life. Lorenzo gave her space but made his presence known in small ways. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table. Books she might enjoy materialized on the nightstand in the guest room. Meals arrived precisely when she needed them, prepared by someone whose cooking rivaled the best restaurants in Florence. "Does everyone in your organization cook like they trained at culinary school?" Elena asked on the third morning, cutting into perfectly fluffy ricotta pancakes drizzled with honey. Lorenzo looked up from his newspaper, a hint of amusement crossing his features. Matteo's mother owned a trattoria in Trastevere for 40 years. He learned from the best. The same Matteo who probably knows 17 ways to break someone's kneecaps? 18, actually, Lorenzo said mildly, but he's never had to use most of them. Matteo believes in proportional response. "How comforting," Elena muttered, but she couldn't quite suppress a small smile. The absurdity of discussing violence over breakfast in this beautiful apartment with morning light streaming through Renaissance windows felt like something out of a fever dream. On the fourth day, Giancarlo Russo came to visit. Elena had been expecting someone hard and intimidating, the kind of cop who'd seen too much darkness to have much faith left in humanity. Instead, the man Lorenzo introduced was in his late 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle demeanor that immediately put her at ease. "Signorina Rossi," Giancarlo said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Elena replied, but she shook his hand anyway. "Fair enough. Then thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain what we're building against Adrian Falco and how your testimony could help." They sat in Lorenzo's living room, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, while Giancarlo laid out folders full of evidence on the coffee table. Surveillance photos of Adrian meeting with known traffickers, financial records showing suspicious transfers, testimony from 3 of the associates arrested in the raids. "We have enough to charge him," Giancarlo explained, his voice measured and professional. "Money laundering, trafficking, conspiracy. He'll go to trial regardless of whether you testify. But here's the reality. Adrian Falco is smart. He's insulated himself well. His lawyers are expensive and very good at creating reasonable doubt. Without someone who can speak to his character, to his capacity for violence, to the control he exerts over others, juries tend to see a businessman who may have made some questionable financial decisions, not a dangerous criminal who destroys lives." "You want me to be the human face of his crimes?" Elena said quietly. "I want you to show the jury who Adrian Falco really is," Giancarlo corrected gently. "Not the polished persona he presents in court, the man behind closed doors. The one who uses fear and manipulation and violence to control the people around him." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she picked up one of the surveillance photos. Adrian stood outside a warehouse, gesturing animatedly to 2 men whose faces had been circled in red. He looked so normal in the image, just a well-dressed man having a business conversation. Nothing to suggest the monster she knew lived beneath that civilized surface. "What would I have to do?" she asked. "Specifically. And first, we'd do several preparation sessions," Giancarlo explained. "You'd work with prosecutors to go through your testimony, practice answering questions, learn what to expect from defense attorneys. They'll try to discredit you, make you seem unreliable or vindictive. We prepare you for that. How do you prepare someone for being called a liar in front of a courtroom full of people? By reminding you that the truth is the truth, regardless of how Adrian's lawyers try to spin it," Giancarlo said firmly. "By making sure you understand that their job is to create doubt, and your job is simply to tell what happened to you. Nothing more, nothing less." Lorenzo, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. "What kind of protection are we talking about? During the trial? And after?" "Full witness protection protocols during the trial itself," Giancarlo replied. "Secure transport to and from the courthouse. Protection detail, safe housing if needed. After the trial, it depends on the outcome. If Adrian's convicted and sentenced to significant prison time, the immediate threat diminishes. If he's acquitted or receives a light sentence," he trailed off, the implication clear. "If he walks free, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder," Elena finished. "Not necessarily," Lorenzo interjected, his voice hard. "If the trial goes badly, we have other options." Giancarlo shot him a warning look. "Lorenzo, I'm not talking about anything illegal," Lorenzo said, though his expression suggested that legality was somewhat flexible in his mind. Just making sure Elena understands she'll have protection regardless of what happens in court. Elena looked between the two men, reading the unspoken tension. Giancarlo represented the law, the official channels, the proper way of handling dangerous criminals. Lorenzo represented something murkier, protection that came with its own costs, justice that didn't always wait for judges to dispense it. I need to think about this, Elena said, pushing the folders away. This is my entire life we're talking about, my safety, my future. I can't make this decision in one afternoon. Of course, Giancarlo said immediately, gathering his materials with careful hands. Take all the time you need. But Elena, I want you to know that what Adrian did to you matters. Your experience matters, and you have the power to make sure he faces consequences for his actions. That's not a small thing. After Giancarlo left, Elena retreated to the guest room and stared out the window for a long time, watching clouds drift over the Florentine skyline. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. That evening, Lorenzo knocked softly on her door. Dinner's ready if you're hungry, or I can bring something to you if you'd prefer to be alone. Elena opened the door. Lorenzo stood in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. This man who commanded warehouses and organized crime families, suddenly unsure how to handle one damaged woman in his guest room. I'll come out, she said. I'm tired of hiding in here. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Matteo had outdone himself with ossobuco that melted off the bone. Finally, Elena set down her fork and looked directly at Lorenzo. Tell me about your sister, she said. Not just that she died. Tell me about who she was. Lorenzo's expression shuddered briefly, but then something softened. Julia was fierce, he said quietly. Smart, stubborn, absolutely fearless. She wanted to be a journalist, expose corruption, change the world. Our family business embarrassed her. She thought we should be better, do better. We fought about it constantly. How did she get involved with Adrian's associate? She was investigating trafficking routes through Rome for an article. Met Marco Santoro at a cafe, thought he was just a source. By the time she realized what he really was, she was already in too deep. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. She came to me, scared, said she wanted out, but Marco was threatening her. I told her I'd handle it, told her to trust me and stay quiet while I worked out a solution. What happened? I underestimated how quickly Marco would move, how ruthless Adrian's organization could be when they felt threatened. 3 days later, Giulia's car went off a bridge outside Civitavecchia. Police ruled it an accident, faulty brakes, tragic, but not suspicious. Lorenzo's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way people get when the pain is too deep for expression. But I knew. I knew it was them, and I couldn't prove it, couldn't save her, couldn't do anything except watch them get away with murdering my baby sister. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Lorenzo looked startled by the gesture, as if kindness was something he didn't quite know how to accept. That's not your fault, she said firmly. You didn't kill her. They did. I failed to protect her when she needed me most. You tried. That's more than a lot of people would do, and now you're trying to protect me, trying to stop Adrian before he destroys someone else. That means something, Lorenzo. It means Giulia's death wasn't meaningless if it taught you how to save others. Lorenzo turned his hand to grip hers properly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I don't want to pressure you into testifying. This has to be your choice. But I need you to understand. If you decide not to, I won't think less of you. I'll still protect you. I'll still help you build whatever life you want, wherever you want it. This isn't conditional. I know, Elena said, and surprised herself by meaning it. Somewhere over the past few days, she'd started to believe that Lorenzo Valenti actually meant what he said, that his protection didn't come with the kind of strings Adrian had attached to everything. I'm going to do it, she said suddenly, the decision crystallizing even as she spoke the words. I'm going to testify. Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? You don't have to decide right now. I'm sure, Elena said, feeling something like steel forming in her spine. You were right. I can't spend the rest of my life running. I can't let Adrian Falco take anything else from me. He took 2 years of my life. He took my sense of safety. He took my ability to trust people. I won't let him take my voice too. It won't be easy, Lorenzo warned. The trial will be brutal. They'll dig into every part of your relationship, question every decision you made, try to make you look complicit or vindictive, or, I don't care, Elena interrupted. Let them try. Let Adrian's lawyers ask me why I stayed, why I didn't leave sooner, why I didn't report the abuse. I'll tell them the truth, that I was afraid, that he'd broken me down piece by piece until I didn't trust my own judgment anymore, that leaving felt impossible until suddenly it was the only option left. And maybe, just maybe, someone else who's living in that same hell will hear my testimony and realize they can leave too. Lorenzo studied her face for a long moment, and Elena thought she saw something like pride in his expression. All right, he said quietly. Then we prepare. We make sure you're ready for everything they'll throw at you, and we make sure Adrian Falco never gets the chance to hurt you again. The preparation began the next morning. Giancarlo returned with 2 prosecutors, a stern woman named Claudia Ferretti and a younger man called Alessandro, who specialized in witness preparation. They transformed Lorenzo's dining room into a makeshift courtroom, complete with a chair positioned where the witness stand would be. The defense will try to rattle you, Claudia explained, pacing in front of Elena like a professor before an attentive student. They'll ask the same questions 15 different ways, hoping you'll contradict yourself. They'll bring up any inconsistencies in your story, any detail that doesn't align perfectly with their timeline. Your job is to stay calm and stick to the truth. What if I don't remember something perfectly? Elena asked. It's been months since I left, and I spent 2 years trying not to pay attention to the things that scared me. Then you say, I don't remember, Alessandro said simply. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. What's not acceptable is guessing or making something up to fill gaps. Juries can smell dishonesty, and one lie destroys your entire testimony. They ran through practice questions for hours. Claudia played the role of defense attorney, her questions sharp and occasionally cruel. Isn't it true, Signorina Rossi, that you lived rent-free in Signor Falco's apartment for 2 years? That he bought you expensive gifts, took you to fine restaurants, supported you financially while you... What was it you did for work? I worked part-time at a bookstore, Elena answered, keeping her voice steady despite the implied accusation. And yes, Adrian paid for most of our living expenses. So you benefited quite substantially from this relationship you now claim was abusive? Financial support doesn't erase violence, Elena said firmly. Adrian could have bought me the entire city of Turin, and it wouldn't make the bruises heal faster or the fear go away. Claudia nodded approvingly. Good. Stay composed, but don't be afraid to push back. Juries respond to strength. They practiced for 6 days straight. Elena learned to recognize leading questions, to pause before answering to collect her thoughts, to maintain eye contact even when the questions made her want to disappear into herself. On the 7th day, Lorenzo took her to meet with a psychologist who specialized in trauma testimony. Dr. Martina Russo was a petite woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through Elena's carefully constructed defenses. They met in her office near the university, a quiet space filled with books and comfortable chairs that smelled faintly of lavender. The prosecutors will prepare you for the legal aspects, Dr. Russo said, pouring Elena tea from a delicate porcelain pot. My job is to prepare you for the emotional experience of testifying against your abuser. I've been handling my emotions just fine, Elena said, a bit defensively. Have you? Dr. Russo's voice was gentle but direct. Because from what Lorenzo tells me, you haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since you agreed to testify. You've barely eaten, and you have nightmares that wake you up screaming. Elena flushed, embarrassed that Lorenzo had shared those details. I'm managing. Managing and thriving are 2 different things, Elena. What I want to help you understand is that trauma responses during testimony are normal. If you freeze up when you see Adrian in court, that's normal. If you start crying and can't stop, that's normal. If you feel like you can't breathe or you want to run, all normal responses to facing the person who hurt you. The prosecutor said I need to stay strong. Show the jury I'm credible. You can be strong and still have emotions, Dr. Russo corrected. In fact, showing appropriate emotion makes you more credible, not less. Juries are made up of human beings, Elena. They understand fear. They understand pain. What they don't trust is someone who seems robotic or detached when describing traumatic events. Over the next several sessions, Dr. Russo walked Elena through techniques for managing panic attacks, for grounding herself when memories threatened to overwhelm her, for separating the past from the present moment. When you're on that stand and you start to feel afraid, I want you to remember this, Dr. Russo said during their final session. Adrian Falco cannot touch you in that courtroom. There will be guards, lawyers, a judge. You are not alone with him. You are not powerless. You are the one with the power now, the power to speak truth, to seek justice, to take back the narrative he tried to control. What if the jury doesn't believe me? Elena asked quietly. Then you'll know you tried. You'll know you stood up and used your voice regardless of the outcome. And that's something Adrian can never take away from you. Between preparation sessions, Elena's life developed a strange new routine. Mornings with prosecutors, afternoons with Dr. Russo, evenings with Lorenzo where they'd eat dinner and talk about everything except the trial. Lorenzo told her about growing up in Florence, about the pressure of family expectations, and the careful balance required to navigate both legitimate business and the shadowy enterprises that had supported the Valenti family for generations. My father wanted me to go completely legitimate, Lorenzo said one evening over wine on the terrace overlooking the Arno. He'd built enough legal businesses that we could have walked away from the rest, but I was young and stupid and thought I knew better, thought I could have it both ways, respectability and power. Do you regret it? Elena asked. Sometimes. The legitimate businesses make money and don't require looking over my shoulder constantly, but the other side, that's where the real power is. The ability to solve problems that the legal system can't or won't address. The capacity to protect people who fall through the cracks. He paused. Like you. I didn't fall through the cracks, Elena said. I jumped. Lorenzo smiled at that. Fair point. As the weeks passed, Elena noticed something shifting in her relationship with Lorenzo. The careful distance he'd maintained began to erode, replaced by an easy companionship that felt both natural and terrifying. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read, found herself looking for him when he wasn't around. One evening, 3 weeks into her preparation, Elena found Lorenzo in his study working late. He looked exhausted, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, surrounded by papers and empty espresso cups. You should sleep, she said from the doorway. Lorenzo looked up, surprised. I could say the same to you. It's past midnight. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about tomorrow's session with Claudia. Elena moved into the study, perching on the edge of his desk. She wants to go through the worst night, the one that made me finally leave. Lorenzo's expression darkened. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I know. But maybe I should practice on someone who won't judge how I tell it. Elena took a breath. It was a Friday night. Adrian had been drinking since he got home from work, which was never a good sign. I'd made dinner, his favorite, trying to preempt whatever was bothering him, but nothing I did was right. The pasta was overcooked. I'd set the table wrong. My dress was too revealing or not revealing enough, I can never remember which. Lorenzo remained silent, just listening. He started out with insults. That's how it always began, verbal attacks designed to make me feel small, stupid, worthless. Then he threw his wine glass at the wall. I flinched, and that made him angrier. Said I was overreacting, being dramatic, making him look like a monster when he'd barely done anything. Elena's voice remained steady, clinical almost, as if she were describing events that had happened to someone else. When I tried to leave the room, he grabbed my arm, hard enough to leave bruises. Told me we weren't done talking, that I didn't get to walk away from him. Elena, I'm fine, she said quickly. I need to get through this, so I can tell it in court without falling apart. She continued. He pushed me against the wall, started screaming in my face about how ungrateful I was, how much he'd done for me, how I owed him everything. And then he hit me. Not the first time, but the hardest. Split my lip, made my vision go black around the edges. Lorenzo's hands had clenched into fists on his desk, but he said nothing. When I came to, I was on the floor and Adrian was crying, apologizing, saying he loved me. He didn't mean it. He'd had a bad day and I'd pushed him too far. He tried to help me up, tried to take care of my injuries, and I looked at him, and I knew that if I stayed, eventually he'd hit me hard enough that I wouldn't wake up, that his apologies meant nothing, that love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. So you left. Lorenzo said quietly. So I planned to leave. It took me another week to get everything in place. But yes, that night was when I decided that surviving meant disappearing, that I couldn't save the relationship or fix him or make him love me the right way. I could only save myself. Elena looked at Lorenzo and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What? She asked. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lorenzo said simply. And I'm in awe of you. The words settled between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple admiration. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Lorenzo stood, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. Elena, I need to tell you something. And you can ask me to leave you alone after, but I can't keep pretending. Don't! Elena interrupted, her heart hammering. Don't say it. Why not? Because I'm broken, Lorenzo. Because I don't know how to trust my own judgment about men anymore. Because everything is so complicated right now with the trial and Adrian and... Because you feel it too, Lorenzo finished. And it scares you. Elena couldn't deny it. Over the past weeks, somewhere between preparation sessions and quiet dinners and late-night conversations, she'd developed feelings for Lorenzo Valenti that terrified her precisely because they felt real. Not the desperate, anxious attachment she'd had with Adrian, but something calmer, steadier, like coming home after a long journey. Yes, she admitted quietly. I feel it too, and I don't know what to do about it. You don't have to do anything, Lorenzo said, reaching up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. Not until you're ready. Not until the trial is over and Adrian is in prison and you've had time to breathe and figure out who you are outside of survival mode. I can wait, Elena. I've waited this long. What if I'm never ready? Elena whispered. What if I'm too damaged to ever... You're not damaged, Lorenzo said firmly. You're healing. There's a difference. And whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were the release of pressure she'd been holding for so long, the overwhelming relief of being seen and accepted and not pressured to be anything other than exactly who she was in this moment. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, and Elena let herself be held. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. Not just physically protected, but emotionally safe in a way she'd forgotten was possible. They stood like that for a long time, Elena's head against Lorenzo's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the solid warmth of him. No expectations, no demands, just comfort freely given and gratefully received. When they finally pulled apart, Lorenzo kept his hands on her shoulders, meeting her eyes seriously. Whatever happens with the trial, whatever you decide about us afterward, you're not alone anymore. Do you understand that? You have people who care about you, who will protect you, who want to see you thrive, not just survive. I understand, Elena said. And Lorenzo, thank you for everything, for saving me that night, for believing I was worth protecting, for not giving up even when I wanted to run. You saved yourself, Lorenzo corrected gently. I just made sure you had the space to do it. 3 days later, Giancarlo called with news. We have a trial date, 8 weeks from now. And Elena, there's something else. Adrian made bail. His lawyers argued he wasn't a flight risk, and the judge agreed. He's out, with restrictions, but he's out. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. He's free? He has to wear an ankle monitor, can't leave the Turin area, can't contact you or any witnesses. But yes, he's out of custody until the trial. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept imagining Adrian somewhere out there, free to move and plan and scheme. The ankle monitor felt like a flimsy protection against someone who'd already proven he could track her across Italy. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and padded out to the terrace. The Arno glittered below, the city lights reflecting off its surface like scattered diamonds. Can't sleep either, Lorenzo's voice came from the shadows. He was sitting in one of the terrace chairs, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Giancarlo told you about Adrian making bail. He did. Lorenzo gestured to the chair beside him. Come sit. Elena settled into the chair, pulling her knees up to her chest. I know the ankle monitor is supposed to keep him in Turin. I know he'll be arrested if he violates the restrictions. But you don't trust that technology and court orders will stop someone who's already broken every boundary you've set, Lorenzo finished. I understand. which is why I've increased security. There are people watching this building 24 hours a day, eyes on the airport, the train stations, the highways coming into Florence. If Adrian Falco so much as thinks about coming here, we'll know. You can't watch me forever. I can watch you until the trial is over and he's behind bars where he belongs, Lorenzo said firmly. After that, we'll reassess. But for now, you're protected. I promise you that. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Lorenzo's security measures would be enough, but fear had taken root deep in her chest and promises felt fragile against the weight of it. What if he comes anyway? She asked quietly. What if he decides that revenge is worth violating bail, worth getting arrested? What if he doesn't care about the consequences anymore? Lorenzo set down his glass and turned to face her fully. Then I'll do what I should have done the night he broke down your door. I'll make sure he never threatens you again. Not through the legal system, not through testimony and trials and hoping judges make the right call. I'll handle it personally and permanently. The darkness in Lorenzo's voice should have frightened Elena. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief. Because unlike Adrian's threats, which were designed to control and terrorize, Lorenzo's promise felt like protection, like someone finally standing between her and the monster, willing to be the shield she'd never had. Don't do anything that would put you in danger, Elena said. I don't want you sacrificing yourself for me. That's not your decision to make, Lorenzo replied gently. And it wouldn't be sacrifice. It would be justice, the kind that sometimes has to exist outside courtrooms and legal procedures. They sat in silence for a while, watching the night sky begin to lighten with the approaching dawn. Somewhere in the city, church bells began to toll, marking the hour. 8 weeks, Elena said softly. 8 weeks until I have to face him in court. 8 weeks to prepare, Lorenzo corrected. 8 weeks to get stronger. 8 weeks to make absolutely certain that when you walk into that courtroom, you're ready to take back everything Adrian Falco tried to steal from you. Elena took a deep breath, feeling something like determination settle in her chest alongside the fear. Then let's make them count. The 8 weeks passed faster than Elena expected, each day bleeding into the next in a blur of preparation sessions, legal briefings, and sleepless nights. She memorized the layout of the courthouse, practiced walking to the witness stand without trembling, learned to control her breathing when panic threatened to overwhelm her. Claudia drilled her relentlessly on the timeline of events, on dates and details that Elena had tried so hard to forget. Alessandro taught her how to recognize manipulative questioning, how to pause and collect herself when the defense attorney tried to rattle her. Dr. Russo helped her develop coping mechanisms for the inevitable moment when she'd have to look directly at Adrian Falco and speak the truth he'd spent 2 years convincing her didn't matter. Through it all, Lorenzo remained a steady presence. He never pushed, never pressured, never made her feel like his protection came with expectations attached. He was just there, a safe harbor in a storm that seemed to have no end. 5 days before the trial, Giancarlo arrived at Lorenzo's apartment looking grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble, spreading documents across the dining table. Adrian's lawyers filed a motion to exclude Elena's testimony. They're arguing that since she never reported the abuse to police, never sought medical treatment for her injuries, and has no corroborating witnesses, her testimony is prejudicial and unreliable. "That's ridiculous," Lorenzo said sharply. "Abuse victims don't report for dozens of legitimate reasons. Fear, shame, economic dependence. I know that, you know that, and any reasonable person knows that," Giancarlo interrupted. "But Adrian's lawyers are very good at making unreasonable arguments sound compelling. The judge is reviewing the motion now. We'll have a ruling tomorrow." Elena felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. "If the judge grants it, I can't testify." "If the judge grants it, the prosecution's case becomes significantly weaker," Giancarlo admitted. "We have the financial evidence, the witness testimony from Adrian's associates, the trafficking charges. But without you, we lose the personal element, the human cost. Juries need to see that Adrian Falco isn't just a businessman who made questionable financial decisions. He's a dangerous man who destroys lives." "Then we make sure the judge denies the motion," Lorenzo said flatly. "It's not that simple. Judges have broad discretion on evidentiary matters, and nothing about this is simple," Lorenzo cut in. "But we don't have a backup plan. Elena's testimony is crucial, so we need to prepare for the judge to allow it and have contingencies if they don't." Giancarlo nodded slowly. Agreed. Elena, if the motion is denied and you're cleared to testify, you need to be prepared for Adrian's lawyers to go after you hard. They'll bring up every inconsistency, every decision you made that they can twist to make you look complicit or vindictive. I'm ready, Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The next morning, Elena woke to find Lorenzo already up, pacing the terrace with his phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass doors, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the sharp gestures that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. When he finally came inside, his expression was carefully neutral. That was Giancarlo. The judge denied the motion. You're testifying. Relief and terror flooded through Elena in equal measure. When? Day 3 of the trial. They're starting with the financial crimes, the trafficking charges, building the foundation before they bring you in to show the jury who Adrian really is. 4 days. She had 4 days to prepare herself for the hardest thing she'd ever done. I want to see the courtroom, Elena said suddenly. Before the trial starts, I want to know what it looks like, where I'll be sitting, where Adrian will be. I don't want to walk in there blind. Lorenzo considered this, then nodded. I'll arrange it. Giancarlo can get us access after hours. That evening, Elena stood in the empty courtroom where her future would be decided. The space was smaller than she'd imagined, more intimate. The judge's bench loomed at the front, elevated and imposing. The witness stand sat to its left, exposed and vulnerable looking. And there, at the defense table, was where Adrian would sit, close enough that she'd see every expression on his face when she spoke. It's going to be packed, Giancarlo said quietly, his voice echoing in the empty space. Media, spectators, Adrian's people. The prosecution team estimates over 100 people in this room when you testify. Elena's stomach churned. All watching me, judging whether I'm telling the truth. All watching you be brave, Lorenzo corrected, standing close beside her. All seeing that Adrian Falco's control over you ended the day you walked away. Elena moved to the witness stand, sat in the chair, looked out at the empty gallery. She tried to imagine it filled with faces, tried to prepare herself for the weight of all those eyes. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair until her knuckles went white. You don't have to do this, Lorenzo said, though his voice suggested he hoped she would. Even now, you can change your mind. The prosecution will move forward with or without you. And if they lose? Elena asked. If Adrian walks free because I was too scared to speak? Then he walks free, and we find another way to stop him. But you don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of justice, Elena. Your well-being matters more than any verdict. Elena stood, moved to where Lorenzo waited at the edge of the gallery. I'm doing this, not just for the prosecution's case or for justice, or even for your sister. I'm doing it because I need to prove to myself that Adrian Falco doesn't own my voice anymore, that I can stand in a room with him and tell the truth without his permission. Lorenzo's eyes held something fierce and proud. Then we'll make sure you're ready. The morning of the trial dawned gray and threatening, storm clouds gathering over Florence like a physical manifestation of Elena's anxiety. She'd barely slept, her mind running through testimony and potential questions until the words lost all meaning. Lorenzo drove her to the courthouse himself, flanked by 2 security vehicles. The media presence was overwhelming. Cameras, reporters, people shouting questions as their car pushed through the crowd. Is it true you were Falco's mistress? Did you know about the trafficking? Are you testifying for revenge or justice? Elena kept her eyes forward, focusing on breathing, on not letting the chaos penetrate her carefully constructed composure. Lorenzo's hand found hers, squeezed once, grounding her. Inside, Giancarlo met them with the prosecution team. Claudia looked sharp and professional in a navy suit. Alessandro nervous but determined. They'd transformed from practice partners into warriors preparing for battle. The defense arrived 20 minutes ago, Giancarlo said. Adrian's already inside, conferring with his lawyers. You won't see him until you're called to testify, but I wanted you to know he's here. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. The trial's first 2 days passed in a haze of legal proceedings Elena watched from the gallery. The prosecution methodically built their case. Financial experts testifying about money laundering, law enforcement detailing trafficking operations, former associates turning state's evidence in exchange for reduced sentences. Through it all, Adrian sat at the defense table looking calm and composed, occasionally whispering to his high-priced lawyers but never showing a crack in his facade. He wore expensive suits, smiled politely at the jury, projected the image of a successful businessman wrongly accused. Elena watched him from her seat 3 rows back, Lorenzo solid and protective beside her, and felt rage building in her chest. This was the man who'd terrorized her, who'd made her afraid to breathe too loudly or speak her mind or exist without permission. And here he sat, playing the victim, his lawyers painting him as a hard-working entrepreneur targeted by overzealous prosecutors. On the evening of day 2, Claudia pulled Elena aside. "You're up first thing tomorrow morning. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Elena admitted, "but ready." "Good. Remember everything we practiced. Stay calm, stick to the truth. Don't let them bait you into anger or tears. You're strong, Elena. Show them that strength." That night, Elena couldn't eat dinner. She tried, pushing pasta around her plate while Lorenzo watched with concern, but her stomach rejected the idea of food. Instead, they sat on the terrace in the gathering darkness, the Arno flowing peacefully below while Elena's world felt like it was splitting apart. "Tell me something good," she said quietly. "Something that has nothing to do with trials or Adrian or any of this. I need to remember there's a world beyond tomorrow." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, then said, "After this is over, after the trial, after the verdict, after you've had time to breathe and heal, I want to take you somewhere. Anywhere you choose. Paris, Barcelona, the Amalfi Coast. Somewhere beautiful where we can just exist without looking over our shoulders." "That sounds like a date," Elena said, surprised by the flutter in her chest. "It would be, if you wanted it to be. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who've been through hell together, choosing to see something beautiful instead." Elena turned to look at him, this man who'd become her protector, her ally, her anchor in the storm. "And if I said yes, if I said I wanted that, wanted you, what happens then?" Lorenzo reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with achingly gentle fingers. "Then we figure it out together. One day at a time, no rush, no pressure. We take as long as you need to trust that what's between us isn't like what you had with Adrian, that it's real and safe and yours to control." "I'm not sure I know how to do that," Elena whispered. "How to trust my own judgment about someone after everything." "Then we learn together," Lorenzo said simply. "Because I'm not perfect either, Elena. I have my own damage, my own guilt, my own ways I've let the darkness touch me. But with you, I want to try being better, being the kind of man who deserves someone as strong as you." Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were the release of something she'd held too tightly for too long, the belief that she was broken beyond repair, that what Adrian had done to her had destroyed her capacity for real connection. "Ask me again after tomorrow," she said. "After I testify. After I prove to myself that I can do this. I'll ask you every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes," Lorenzo replied. The morning of day 3 arrived with unforgiving clarity. Elena dressed carefully in the outfit Claudia had helped her choose. Professional, but not expensive. Modest, but not dowdy. The kind of clothing that projected credibility without seeming calculated. Her hands shook as she applied minimal makeup, trying to hide the dark circles that testified to another sleepless night. Lorenzo waited in the living room, looking nearly as tense as she felt. "Ready?" he asked, though they both knew there was no such thing as ready for what was coming. "As I'll ever be," Elena replied. The courthouse was even more crowded than the previous days, word having spread that the prosecution's star witness would be testifying. Elena was ushered into a private room away from the gallery, kept separate until she was called. Giancarlo went over last-minute reminders while Claudia touched up Elena's makeup with a steady hand. "Remember," Claudia said, "you're not on trial here. Adrian is. You're simply telling the truth about your experience. That's all anyone can ask of you." Then they were moving, Giancarlo leading Elena through corridors to the courtroom's side entrance. She could hear the murmur of the crowd through the heavy doors, could feel her heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Elena Rossi to the stand," the bailiff's voice called. The doors opened, and Elena walked into the courtroom. The first thing she saw was the jury, 12 faces watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy to suspicion. Then Claudia at the prosecution table, nodding encouragement. Then Lorenzo in the gallery, his dark eyes steady and certain, silently promising that she wasn't alone. And finally, inevitably, Adrian. He sat at the defense table looking exactly as she remembered, handsome in that dangerous way, expensive suit perfectly tailored, his expression carefully neutral. But when their eyes met, Elena saw the flash of something in his gaze. Possession, warning, the silent threat that he'd perfected during their 2 years together. Her steps faltered for just a moment. Then she remembered Dr. Russo's words, "He cannot touch you here," and forced herself forward. Across the well of the court, up the steps to the witness stand, her hand on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. Claudia approached with a warm smile, the kind designed to put nervous witnesses at ease. "Please state your name for the record." "Elena Maria Rossi." Her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "Thank you, Ms. Rossi. Can you tell the court how you know the defendant, Adrian Falco?" This was it. The moment everything hinged on. Elena took a breath, met Claudia's eyes, and began. "I was in a relationship with Adrian Falco for approximately 2 years. We met at a cafe in Turin where I was working, and he asked me to dinner. I thought he was charming, successful, attentive. I thought I was lucky." "And when did that change?" "Gradually at first. Small things. Criticism about my appearance, my friends, how I spent my time. Then controlling behaviors. He didn't like me working, so I quit my job. He didn't like my friends, so I stopped seeing them. He isolated me piece by piece until my entire world revolved around him and keeping him happy." "Did Mr. Falco ever become physically violent with you?" Elena's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. In the defendant's seat, Adrian's expression remained neutral, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "Yes. The first time was about 6 months into our relationship. He'd been drinking, and I said something that upset him. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises. Then he apologized, cried, promised it would never happen again. I believed him. But it did happen again. Many times. The violence escalated over the next year and a half. Grabbing became pushing. Pushing became hitting. By the end, I was afraid to speak, afraid to move wrong, afraid to do anything that might set him off." Claudia walked Elena through the timeline methodically, asking about specific incidents, having her describe the progression of abuse in clinical detail. Elena kept her voice steady, her answers clear, refusing to look at Adrian even though she could feel his eyes boring into her. "Ms. Rossi, why didn't you report these incidents to the police?" This was the question Claudia had warned her about, the one the defense would hammer on. "Because I was afraid. Adrian told me that if I ever tried to leave, if I ever told anyone what he did, he would make sure I regretted it. He had money, connections, power. I was nobody, a girl from a small town with no resources and nowhere to go. Who would have believed me?" "What finally made you decide to leave?" Elena closed her eyes briefly, remembering that final night. "There was an incident where Adrian became violent after drinking. He hit me hard enough to split my lip and knock me unconscious briefly. When I came to, he was apologizing and trying to help me, but I just looked at him and I knew, if I stayed, eventually he would kill me. Maybe not intentionally, but one day he'd hit me too hard or push me too far, and I wouldn't survive it. So you left." "So I planned to leave. I waited until Adrian was away on business, packed what I could carry, and disappeared. I changed my appearance, used a different name, moved to Florence, and tried to become invisible." "Why Florence specifically?" "Because it was far enough from Turin to feel safe, but not so far that I'd stand out, and because I'd always wanted to see it. I thought if I was going to start over, I might as well start somewhere beautiful." Claudia nodded, then asked the question Elena had been dreading. "Ms. Rossi, during your relationship with Adrian Falco, did you ever witness anything related to his business dealings?" Elena's throat went dry. This was the part where she implicated Adrian in more than just domestic violence, where she helped build the prosecution's case for trafficking and money laundering. "Yes, there were men who came to our apartment sometimes, hard-looking men who made me uncomfortable. Adrian would send me to another room, but I could hear parts of their conversations. They talked about shipments, about routes, about product. I didn't understand at first what they meant." "When did you realize what they were discussing?" "About a year into our relationship, one of the men got careless, left a bag on our coffee table while he went to the bathroom. Adrian was on a phone call in his office. I looked in the bag and saw packages of white powder wrapped in plastic. I knew what it was. What did you do? Nothing. I closed the bag, went to the bedroom, and pretended I'd never seen it, because I knew that if Adrian found out I knew about his business, I'd become a liability. And I'd seen enough crime shows to know what happens to liabilities. So you stayed silent. I stayed alive, Elena corrected quietly. That's what you do when you're trapped with someone dangerous. You survive however you can. Claudia asked a few more questions, establishing dates and details that corroborated the testimony of other witnesses. Then she thanked Elena and returned to her seat. The defense attorney stood, and Elena's stomach dropped. Marco Benedetti was everything Claudia had warned her about: silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of polished charm that concealed sharp teeth. He smiled at Elena like they were old friends about to have a pleasant chat. Miss Rossi, you testified that you lived with my client for 2 years. During that time, he paid for your apartment, your food, your clothing, your expenses. Is that correct? Yes. And in exchange for this financial support, what did you provide? Elena's jaw tightened. I was his girlfriend. I provided companionship. Companionship, Benedetti repeated, making the word sound sordid. But you didn't work during most of this period, correct? You quit your job at Mr. Falco's suggestion? He didn't suggest. He demanded, according to your testimony. But isn't it true that you were happy to quit working and let my client support you financially? That you enjoyed the lifestyle he provided? I was happy at first, Elena admitted, before I understood the cost. Benedetti paced in front of the witness stand, playing to the jury. The cost being that he expected you to behave like a partner in a relationship, to respect his preferences, consider his feelings. The cost being my freedom, Elena said sharply. My autonomy, my right to exist as a person rather than his possession. Your Honor, the witness is being argumentative, Benedetti objected. Sustained. Miss Rossi, please answer the questions directly, the judge said. Benedetti smiled, sensing blood in the water. Miss Rossi, you claim my client was violent with you on multiple occasions. Yet you never sought medical treatment, never filed a police report, never told anyone what was allegedly happening. Why is that? I already explained. I was afraid. Afraid of what specifically? Afraid my client would retaliate somehow? Yes. But you have no evidence that he ever threatened you if you reported the abuse, do you? No texts, no emails, no recordings? He didn't need to threaten explicitly. He made it clear through his actions that crossing him would have consequences. Actions such as? Elena's hands clenched. He isolated me from everyone who might help me. He controlled every aspect of my life. He made me financially dependent on him. And yes, he hit me hard enough to leave bruises. That's the threat. The knowledge that if I stepped out of line, the violence would escalate. Benedetti changed tactics. You mentioned seeing a bag of what you believed to be drugs in your apartment. Did you report this to the police? No? Why not? If you truly saw evidence of drug trafficking, wouldn't a concerned citizen report that to the authorities? A concerned citizen who wasn't afraid for her life might, Elena shot back. I was living with the man. Reporting him would have put me in immediate danger. Or perhaps you didn't report it because you were complicit. Because you knew about my client's business dealings and chose to benefit from them financially rather than do the right thing. Objection, Claudia called. Argumentative and assuming facts, not in evidence. Sustained, the judge ruled, but the damage was done. Elena could see some jury members looking at her with new suspicion, wondering if she'd been a willing participant in Adrian's crimes rather than a victim. Benedetti pressed harder. Ms. Rossi, when you left my client, you stole jewelry, cash, and other valuable items. Isn't that correct? I took my grandmother's jewelry, which belonged to me, and money I'd saved from my part-time work. I didn't steal anything. According to Mr. Falco, you took nearly 10,000 euros in jewelry worth significantly more. According to Mr. Falco, I also belong to him like property, Elena said, her voice rising. His version of reality doesn't align with the truth. Ms. Rossi, please control yourself, the judge warned. Elena forced herself to breathe, to find the calm center Dr. Russo had taught her to access. She looked directly at Benedetti, then passed him to the jury. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to make me look like a liar, or a gold digger, or someone who's testifying out of revenge. But the truth is simple. I was in a relationship with a man who hurt me repeatedly, who made me afraid to leave, who isolated and controlled me until I had nothing left but fear. When I finally found the courage to escape, I ran because I knew staying meant dying. That's not revenge. That's survival. Benedetti tried several more angles, but Elena had found her footing. She answered each question calmly, refused to be rattled, stuck to the truth no matter how he tried to twist it. After an hour that felt like days, he finally dismissed her with barely concealed frustration. "No further questions, Your Honor." "The witness may step down," the judge said. Elena stood on shaking legs and walked back through the courtroom. As she passed the defense table, she made herself look directly at Adrian for the first time since her testimony began. He stared back at her with cold fury, his mask of composure finally slipping. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear but could read clearly. "You're dead." Elena kept walking, kept her head high, kept moving until she was through the doors and into the corridor where Lorenzo waited. The moment she saw him, the adrenaline that had sustained her through testimony evaporated. Her knees buckled, and Lorenzo caught her, holding her steady. "I did it," she whispered against his chest. "I told them everything." "You were magnificent," Lorenzo said fiercely. "You were strong and brave, and you didn't let them break you." "Adrian," Elena managed. As I walked past, he said, "I saw," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice going hard. "And he just made a mistake that will cost him. Threatening a witness in open court, even silently, that's something the jury will hear about." Giancarlo appeared, looking grim but satisfied. "Claudia's already filing a motion to inform the jury about Adrian's threat, and the bailiff caught it on camera. That's going to play very badly for the defense." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. Relief, exhaustion, residual fear all mixing together. "Is it over? My part, I mean." "Your testimony is done," Giancarlo confirmed. "The defense might recall you, but I doubt they will after how badly that cross-examination went. You hurt their case more than you helped it. Benedetti tried to discredit you and instead made you look even more credible. What happens now?" "Now the prosecution rests, the defense presents their case, and we wait for the jury to decide," Giancarlo said. "But Elena, you did everything we asked and more. Regardless of the verdict, you should be proud of yourself." Lorenzo kept his arm around Elena as they left the courthouse through a side exit, avoiding the media circus at the front. The car ride back to his apartment passed in silence, Elena staring out the window and processing everything that had happened. Once inside, she went straight to the guest room, stripped off the carefully chosen outfit, and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a soft robe, Lorenzo was waiting in the living room with tea, and the kind of comfortable silence that asked for nothing. "How are you really?" he asked after a while. Elena curled into the corner of the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't know. Relieved that it's over, terrified about the verdict, proud that I actually did it, exhausted down to my bones." "That all sounds reasonable," Lorenzo said. "What you did today took more courage than most people possess. You looked your abuser in the eye and spoke truth to power. That matters, Elena. Whether the jury convicts him or not, that matters." "Adrian threatened me," Elena said quietly, "right there in the courtroom. He's not going to let this go." "Adrian's going to prison," Lorenzo said with absolute certainty. "The jury saw you testify. They saw his true nature when he threatened you. And even if by some miracle he's acquitted on the major charges, he's finished in Florence, finished in most of Italy, honestly. Too much scrutiny, too much heat. He'll have to disappear just like you did." Elena wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that the system would protect her, that speaking her truth would be enough. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it real. "What if he's acquitted?" she asked. "What if the jury decides I'm not credible, or that the evidence isn't strong enough?" Lorenzo moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "Then we deal with it. Together. Because you're not alone anymore, Elena. Whatever happens with the verdict, you have people who will protect you, who will stand between you and Adrian Falco for as long as it takes." "I can't ask you to do that forever." "You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference." Lorenzo squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, I'm selfish enough to want you around. So protecting you serves my interests too." Despite everything, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. Selfish how? Because somewhere along the way, protecting you stopped being about redemption or guilt or my sister. It became about you specifically, about the fact that I want to see what happens when you're finally free to build the life you choose. About the possibility that maybe, if you'll let me, I could be part of that life. Elena's breath caught. After everything that had happened today, after the trial and the testimony and Adrian's threat, Lorenzo was offering her something precious. The possibility of a future that wasn't defined by fear or survival. Ask me again, she whispered, about Paris or Barcelona or the Amalfi Coast, about dates and taking our time and figuring things out together. Lorenzo's eyes held hers, dark and certain and full of promise. After this is over, after the verdict, after you've had time to breathe, I want to take you somewhere beautiful. Somewhere we can just exist without looking over our shoulders. And I want to see if what's between us is as real as it feels. What do you say? I say yes, Elena replied, feeling like she was stepping off another cliff, but this time trusting there would be something solid to catch her. I say let's figure it out together. One day at a time. No rush, no pressure. Let's see what happens when we're not just surviving anymore. Lorenzo smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something warm and open. Then we have a plan. Survive the verdict, heal from this nightmare, and then start building something new, together. For the first time since that terrifying night when Adrian had broken down her door, Elena felt something other than fear about the future. She felt hope, fragile and tentative, but real. Whatever the jury decided, whatever happened next, she wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. The defense presented their case over the next 4 days, and Elena watched every moment from the gallery with Lorenzo beside her. Adrian's lawyers painted him as a legitimate businessman targeted by vindictive former employees and an unstable ex-girlfriend seeking revenge. They brought character witnesses who testified to his generosity and professionalism. They presented financial experts who claimed the money transfers were perfectly legal business transactions. But they couldn't explain away the drugs found during the raids, couldn't fully discredit the testimony of Adrian's former associates who turned state's evidence. And they definitely couldn't erase the image of Adrian silently threatening Elena in open court, captured on camera and shown to the jury. On the 10th day of trial, both sides delivered closing arguments. Claudia spoke directly to the jury, her voice clear and passionate. Adrian Falco is a man who built an empire on violence and fear. He trafficked drugs that destroyed lives, laundered money that funded criminal enterprises, and abused a woman he claimed to love. Elena Rossi showed tremendous courage in coming forward to testify about the abuse she suffered. But this case isn't just about her testimony. It's about a pattern of criminal behavior that spans years. The evidence is overwhelming. The witnesses are credible. And the defendant threatened one of those witnesses right here in this courtroom, showing you exactly who he really is. A man who believes he's above the law, above consequences, above justice itself. Prove him wrong. Find Adrian Falco guilty on all counts. Benedetti's closing was equally passionate, arguing that the prosecution had built their case on circumstantial evidence and questionable testimony from criminals seeking plea deals. He portrayed Adrian as a successful entrepreneur targeted by law enforcement looking for a high-profile conviction, and Elena as a bitter ex-girlfriend spinning tales of abuse to justify her own criminal behavior and stealing from him. The prosecution wants you to convict based on emotion rather than evidence, Benedetti told the jury. They want you to see Mr. Falco as a monster because Miss Rossi painted him that way. But where's the proof? Where are the police reports, the medical records, the witnesses to this alleged abuse? They don't exist because the abuse didn't happen. Ms. Rossi is a skilled liar who lived off my client's generosity for 2 years, then repaid him by making false accusations to deflect from her own crimes. Don't let emotion override reason. The evidence doesn't support conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury was dismissed to deliberate at 3 p.m. Giancarlo warned that deliberations could take hours or days, that there was no way to predict how long they'd need to reach a verdict. Elena returned to Lorenzo's apartment and tried to distract herself, but every minute felt like an eternity. She attempted to read but couldn't focus on the words, tried to watch television, but the noise grated on her nerves. Finally gave up and just sat on the terrace, watching the sun sink toward the horizon while her future hung in balance. Lorenzo sat with her, not pushing conversation, just present. His phone rested on the table between them, volume turned up so they wouldn't miss Giancarlo's call. "What will you do?" Elena asked as darkness fell over Florence. "If he's acquitted, I mean. Will you really handle it personally like you said?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to lie to you, Elena. So yes, if Adrian Falco walks free and continues to threaten you, I'll make sure he's no longer a threat. Not through the legal system, through other means. That would make you no better than him." "Perhaps," Lorenzo acknowledged. "But I can live with that burden if it means you're safe. I've already failed one woman I cared about. I won't fail another." "I'm not asking you to become a killer for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Lorenzo turned to face her fully. "There's a darkness in this world that the law can't always touch, Elena. Men like Adrian Falco who are smart enough and rich enough to slip through the cracks of justice. Sometimes the only way to stop them is to meet them in that darkness and make sure they don't come back out." Elena shivered despite the warm evening air. "I don't want that for you. I don't want you to carry that kind of guilt." "Then let's hope the jury does their job and we never have to have this conversation again," Lorenzo said simply. The call came at 9:30 the next morning. Elena was drinking coffee on the terrace, having barely slept, when Lorenzo's phone rang. He answered immediately, his expression neutral as he listened to Giancarlo speak. "Understood. We'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call and met Elena's terrified gaze. The jury reached a verdict, their reconvening court at 10. Elena's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Already? They only deliberated overnight. Is that good or bad?" "It could mean anything," Lorenzo said, but his voice was tight with tension. "Quick verdicts sometimes mean the evidence was overwhelming, or sometimes they mean the jury didn't take the charges seriously. There's no way to know until we hear it." The drive to the courthouse was silent. Elena's mind spun with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What if they acquitted him? What if she'd put herself through the trauma of testifying for nothing? What if Adrian walked out of that courtroom free to come after her? The courthouse was packed, media and spectators filling every available seat. Elena took her place in the gallery with Lorenzo beside her, Giancarlo in front at the prosecution table. Across the aisle, Adrian sat with his lawyers looking confident. Too confident, Elena thought with growing dread. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as the judge entered. Then came the moment Elena had been both dreading and desperate for. The jury filed in, 12 ordinary people who held her future in their hands. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The forewoman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of drug trafficking, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The single word detonated through the courtroom like a bomb. Elena felt Lorenzo's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. "On the charge of money laundering?" "Guilty." "On the charges of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances?" "Guilty." The judge continued through all 17 counts, and the forewoman's answer never changed. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." Adrian's face had gone white, his lawyers frantically whispering to him. In the gallery, some of his supporters were crying, but Elena just sat frozen, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. When the verdicts were all read, the judge thanked the jury and moved immediately to sentencing guidelines. "Mr. Falco, you have been found guilty of serious crimes that have caused immeasurable harm to countless individuals and families. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks for formal sentencing, but I'm inclined to impose the maximum penalty allowed by law. Given the severity of the charges and your behavior during this trial, including threatening a witness, I'm also denying bail pending sentencing. Bailiffs, please take Mr. Falco into custody." Adrian exploded. "This is bullshit! That lying bitch! Mr. Falco, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt," the judge warned sharply. But Adrian was beyond control. He lunged toward the gallery, toward Elena, his face twisted with rage. "You did this! You destroyed everything! I'll kill you, Elena! I swear I'll—" 4 bailiffs tackled him before he made it 3 steps. The courtroom erupted in chaos, people shouting, cameras flashing, Adrian screaming threats while being restrained. Lorenzo pulled Elena against his chest, shielding her, his body tense and ready to intervene if Adrian somehow broke free. But the bailiffs were professionals. Within seconds, they had Adrian in handcuffs, still screaming threats as they dragged him from the courtroom. His voice echoed through the halls even after the doors closed behind him. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order in this court. Everyone please be seated or you will be removed. Slowly, the chaos subsided. Elena sat trembling, hardly able to process what had just happened. Guilty. On all counts. Adrian was going to prison. The nightmare was finally, actually over. Giancarlo turned in his seat, meeting her eyes across the crowded courtroom. He smiled, genuinely smiled, and nodded. You did it, he mouthed. Claudia was openly crying with relief. Alessandro looked shell-shocked. And Lorenzo? Lorenzo was holding Elena like she might break, his face pressed against her hair, whispering, It's over. You're safe. It's finally over. The judge dismissed the court, and suddenly Elena was surrounded by people, prosecutors congratulating her, other survivors of Adrian's crimes thanking her for having the courage to testify, media trying to push microphones in her face until Lorenzo's security team formed a protective barrier. They escaped through the same side exit they'd used before, into a car that whisked them away from the circus before the media could properly mobilize. Elena sat in stunned silence the entire ride, unable to fully believe that she'd actually won, that the system had worked, that speaking her truth had been enough. Back at Lorenzo's apartment, reality began to sink in. Adrian Falco was going to prison for a very long time. The judge had mentioned maximum penalties. With all 17 counts, he was looking at decades behind bars. He would be an old man before he breathed free air again, if he ever did. I need to call my sister, Elena said suddenly. I haven't spoken to her in 8 months because I was afraid Adrian would trace the call. But I need to tell her I'm okay, that it's over. Lorenzo handed her his phone without hesitation. Take all the time you need. The conversation with her sister was emotional and cathartic. Tears and apologies and the promise to visit soon, to rebuild the relationship that Adrian had forced her to abandon. When Elena finally hung up, she felt lighter than she had in years. 2 weeks later, Elena sat in the same courtroom for Adrian's formal sentencing. This time, there was no fear, no trembling, just quiet satisfaction as the judge delivered her ruling. Adrian Falco, you have been convicted of 17 serious crimes. You showed no remorse during trial and threatened the very witness who bravely came forward to testify against you. You are a danger to society and will remain so for the foreseeable future. I hereby sentence you to 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Additionally, I'm ordering you to pay restitution to your victims and forfeit all assets obtained through criminal enterprise. Bailiffs, please remand the defendant to custody. Adrian stared at the judge with undisguised hatred, but he said nothing this time. His lawyers had clearly warned him that another outburst would only make things worse. As the bailiffs led him away, he looked one final time at Elena. She stared back, unflinching. And for the first time since she'd met Adrian Falco all those years ago in that Turin cafe, she felt absolutely no fear when looking at him. He was just a man, a criminal who'd made terrible choices and would now pay the consequences. He had no power over her anymore. After the sentencing, Giancarlo pulled Elena aside. There's one more thing. Adrian's assets are being liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. The court has recognized you as a victim of his crimes. You're entitled to compensation, likely a significant amount, given what they're recovering. Elena blinked in surprise. I don't want his money. I just wanted him to stop threatening me. I understand, but this isn't about what he's giving you. It's about what you're taking back. The years he stole, the trauma he inflicted, the life he disrupted. Think of it as the beginning of rebuilding everything he destroyed. Elena considered this. How much are we talking about? The estimate is around 200,000 euros, possibly more once all assets are liquidated. Enough to start fresh, go back to school if you want, open a business, whatever you choose. 200,000 euros. More money than Elena had ever imagined having. The kind of financial security that meant she'd never have to depend on anyone again, never have to stay in a situation out of economic necessity. I want to do something good with it, she said firmly. Set up a foundation or a shelter, something for other women trying to escape situations like mine. Giancarlo smiled. That's exactly the kind of thing the court loves to hear. I'll put you in touch with some people who can help you establish that. 3 months after the sentencing, Elena stood in a small office space in Florence's Santa Croce neighborhood, looking at the freshly painted sign on the door. Casa Giulia, safe haven for women seeking freedom. Lorenzo stood beside her, his expression complicated, grief and pride and something that looked like healing all mixed together. She would have loved this, he said quietly. My sister. She would have loved that her name is attached to something that saves people. That's why I chose it, Elena said softly, because she was the first one who couldn't be saved. But everyone who comes through these doors can be. And that's Julia's legacy, proof that their deaths weren't meaningless, that something good can come from tragedy. The shelter was modest. 6 beds, a common area, a small kitchen, and a counselor's office. But it was safe and warm, and most importantly, free. Women could come here when they had nowhere else to go, when leaving an abuser meant leaving everything behind. They could stay as long as they needed to get back on their feet, with no judgment and no pressure. Elena had hired a full-time counselor, a security guard for overnight shifts, and partnered with local lawyers who offered pro bono services for restraining orders and custody battles. It wasn't much compared to the scope of the problem, but it was a start. We open next week, Elena said, running her hand along the freshly painted wall. I've already received 12 applications from women who need help. 12 lives we might be able to save. You'll save more than 12, Lorenzo said with certainty. This place will grow. Word will spread. And Casa Giulia will become exactly what you envisioned, a beacon for people who think they have nowhere else to turn. Elena turned to face him fully. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved naturally from protector and protected to something deeper, more equal. They'd taken things slowly, cautiously, Elena learning to trust her instincts about relationships again. And Lorenzo had been patient and respectful, and everything Adrian had never been. I couldn't have done this without you, she said. The shelter, the healing, rebuilding my life. You gave me the space to become myself again. You did the hard work, Lorenzo corrected. I just made sure you were safe while you did it. It was more than that, and you know it. Elena moved closer, taking his hands in hers. You showed me what protection looks like when it doesn't come with conditions attached. What it means when someone says, I'll help you, and actually means it without expecting anything in return. You gave me back my ability to trust. Lorenzo's eyes held that fierce protective look she'd come to recognize and even love. You deserve that trust, Elena. You deserve safety and respect and the chance to heal without pressure. I'm just glad I could provide it. So about that trip you mentioned, Elena said, feeling butterflies in her stomach, despite the months they'd spent growing closer. Paris or Barcelona or the Amalfi Coast. Are you still interested? Are you ready? Lorenzo asked carefully. Really ready? Not just feeling obligated because I offered months ago? Elena considered the question seriously. Was she ready? After everything she'd been through, the abuse, the escape, the trial, the months of healing and rebuilding, was she ready to start something new with someone? To risk her heart again, even with someone who'd proven himself trustworthy? I'm ready, she said, and meant it completely. I'm ready to see what happens when we're not just surviving anymore. When we can actually live and explore and be happy, I'm ready to find out if what's between us is as real as it feels. Lorenzo smiled, really smiled, and pulled her close. Then let's start with the Amalfi Coast, somewhere beautiful and peaceful, where we can just exist together without looking over our shoulders. When? Elena asked, already imagining turquoise waters and sun-soaked cliffs and lazy days with nowhere to be, except exactly where they were. 2 weeks, Lorenzo said. After Casa Giulia officially opens and you've got your staff trained and everything running smoothly, then we take a week away from everything and just see what happens. A week, Elena repeated, testing the words. A week to explore not just the Amalfi Coast, but the possibility of a real relationship with Lorenzo Valenti. A week to learn who she was when she wasn't defined by fear or survival. A week to discover what happiness felt like when you chose it for yourself. And if it goes well, she asked quietly, if we discover this is real and we want more? Then we take it one day at a time, Lorenzo said, echoing his earlier promise. No rush, no pressure, no expectations, except honesty and respect. We build something together at whatever pace feels right for you. Elena rose on her toes and kissed him, the first real kiss they'd shared, not just a brief touch, but something deeper, fuller, more meaningful. Lorenzo responded carefully, letting her set the pace, his hands steady and reassuring on her waist. When they broke apart, Elena felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. This was what a relationship was supposed to feel like, safe and exciting and steady all at once. Not the desperate, anxious attachment she'd had with Adrian, but something calmer and infinitely more precious. "I'm falling for you," she admitted, the words scary but necessary. "I tried not to, tried to keep appropriate boundaries, but somewhere along the way you became essential to my life. And that terrifies me because I know what happens when you give someone that kind of power over you." "I'm falling for you too," Lorenzo said quietly. "Have been since I first saw you at my aunt's cafe, actually. But Elena, what you had with Adrian? That wasn't love. That was control and manipulation disguised as affection. Real love doesn't take power from you. It gives you more power over your own life, your own choices, your own future. And I promise you, whatever this becomes between us, I will never try to diminish your power. Only amplify it." Elena believed him. After months of watching him keep his word about protection and respect, after seeing him honor every promise and boundary, she believed him completely. Casa Julia opened on a warm September morning with modest fanfare. Elena gave a brief speech to the small crowd gathered, mostly local supporters, a few journalists, women who'd already applied for residence. She talked about the importance of having safe spaces for people escaping violence, about the courage it takes to leave an abusive situation, about the necessity of support systems that don't judge or pressure or demand anything in return. Lorenzo stood at the back of the crowd, watching with pride as Elena spoke confidently about her vision for the shelter. This woman who'd been so broken and afraid just months ago now stood before dozens of people, advocating for others like her, using her pain to create something meaningful. After the ribbon cutting, Elena gave tours of the facility to interested parties and spoke with the first 3 women who'd be moving in that week. Their stories varied in details, but were heartbreakingly similar in substance. Men who'd controlled and hurt them, escapes planned in desperation, futures uncertain but hopeful. "You're going to be okay," Elena told each of them. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now. I know everything seems overwhelming and impossible. But you took the first step by leaving, and Casa Julia will help you take the next ones. You're not alone anymore." That evening, exhausted but satisfied, Elena returned to Lorenzo's apartment, though increasingly she thought of it as their apartment, given how much time she spent there. She'd officially moved in 2 weeks ago, finally admitting that the pretense of maintaining her own place was silly when she barely spent any nights there. "How does it feel?" Lorenzo asked, handing her a glass of wine as they settled onto the terrace to watch the sunset. "Having your dream project officially launched?" "Terrifying and amazing," Elena admitted. "What if I can't help them? What if I fail someone the way—" She stopped, the old guilt rising up. "The way you think you failed yourself by staying with Adrian." Lorenzo finished gently. "Elena, you didn't fail. You survived, and now you're using that survival to help others. That's the opposite of failure." "I just keep thinking about all the women who don't make it out," Elena said quietly. "Who to stay too long or go back or don't have anywhere safe to run. What if Casa Julia isn't enough?" "It won't save everyone," Lorenzo acknowledged. "Nothing could. But it will save some. And those lives matter just as much as the ones you can't reach. You're doing important work, Elena. Don't diminish it by focusing on what you can't control." Elena leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When did you get so wise?" "When I met a woman who showed me that strength comes in many forms," Lorenzo replied. "That surviving isn't the same as thriving, but one can lead to the other with the right support. You taught me that." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the Arno flowing peacefully below. Elena thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman hiding in a bathroom while Adrian destroyed her door. Thought about the courage it had taken to send that desperate message, the twist of fate that had delivered it to the right person, the long journey from that moment to this one. "I never thanked you properly," Elena said suddenly. "For answering that wrong number. For coming when I needed you. For being exactly who I needed when my world was falling apart." Lorenzo turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "You don't need to thank me for that." I told you, helping you stopped being about redemption or my sister a long time ago. It became about you, about us. Still, Elena persisted, you saved my life that night, not just physically, but in every way that matters. You gave me back my freedom and my voice and my future. That's not a small thing. Neither is what you gave me, Lorenzo said quietly. You reminded me that redemption is possible, that the darkness I've lived in doesn't have to define me, that choosing to protect someone, to stand between them and harm without asking for anything in return, that matters, that it can be enough to balance the scales. Elena shifted to face him more fully. So what happens now? After the Amalfi Coast trip? After we figure out if this thing between us is as real as it feels, what's the next chapter? Lorenzo smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with achingly gentle fingers. Whatever we want it to be. You run Casa Giulia and help women rebuild their lives. I work to legitimize more of the family businesses and step away from the shadows. We travel when we can, explore new places, make new memories, and somewhere along the way, if you want, we build a life together. Not because you need my protection anymore, but because we choose each other. Because what started as a wrong number became the rightest thing that's ever happened to both of us. That sounds perfect, Elena whispered, feeling tears prick her eyes. But they were happy tears, grateful tears, the kind that came from being exactly where you were supposed to be, with exactly who you were meant to be with. The trip to the Amalfi Coast 2 weeks later was everything Elena had hoped, and more. They rented a small villa overlooking the sea, spent their days exploring tiny villages and swimming in crystalline waters, their evenings eating fresh seafood and drinking local wine while watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in impossible colors. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Not the relationship born of crisis and protection, but something deeper. The everyday intimacy of shared meals and inside jokes and comfortable silences. Elena discovered that Lorenzo was terrible at cooking, but excellent at cleaning up. That he preferred reading to television, appreciated good coffee more than expensive wine, and had a surprisingly dry sense of humor when he felt comfortable enough to show it. Lorenzo learned that Elena sang off-key in the shower, was fiercely competitive at card games, and had dreams of someday writing a book about her experience to help other survivors. That she was stronger than she gave herself credit for, but also allowed herself to be vulnerable in ways that took his breath away. On their last night in the villa, they sat on the terrace under a canopy of stars, the sea whispering against the cliffs below. I don't want to go back, Elena said softly. I want to stay here in this perfect bubble where nothing can touch us. We can come back, Lorenzo promised. As often as you want. This place, or somewhere else beautiful, we'll make it a tradition, escaping together whenever the world gets too heavy. I'd like that, Elena said, then took a breath. Lorenzo, there's something I want to tell you, something I've been thinking about all week. He waited patiently, giving her space to gather her thoughts. I love you, Elena said simply, not because you saved me or protected me, though you did both those things, but because of who you are when all the layers are stripped away. Because you're patient and kind, and you make me feel safe without making me feel small. Because you've never once tried to control me or diminish me or make me doubt myself. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it, not as my protector or my savior, but as my partner, my equal, the person I choose to build a life with. Lorenzo's eyes shone with emotion. I love you too, Elena Rossi. I love your courage and your compassion and the way you turned your pain into purpose. I love that you're stubborn and fierce and refuse to let what happened to you define who you are. I love the future I see when I look at you, not just Casa Giulia and the work you'll do, but the life we'll build together, the happiness we'll create, the love we'll share. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught. I wasn't planning to do this tonight, Lorenzo admitted. I bought this 2 weeks ago and have been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. And I realized there is no perfect moment. There's just now and us, and the certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in platinum. Elena, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to hurt? That partnership can mean freedom instead of control? That choosing each other every day is the greatest adventure we'll ever have? Elena looked at the ring, at Lorenzo's hopeful, vulnerable expression, at the future stretching out before them like an open road leading to places she'd never dared to dream about. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. I choose you, Lorenzo Valenti. I choose us. I choose this life we're building together." Lorenzo slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her close and kissed her with a passion tempered by tenderness. And Elena kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, love and gratitude and hope and the overwhelming relief of finally being free. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony overlooking the Arno, with Francesca crying happy tears and Giancarlo serving as one of Lorenzo's witnesses. The guest list was intimate, close friends, family, and several women from Casa Giulia who'd become like sisters to Elena during their time at the shelter. As they exchanged vows, Elena reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A wrong number sent in desperation. A man who answered when he could have ignored it. A growing partnership built on trust and respect, and eventually, love. Do you, Elena Maria Rossi, take Lorenzo Valenti to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part? I do, Elena said clearly, her voice steady and sure. And do you, Lorenzo Valenti, take Elena Maria Rossi to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part? I do, Lorenzo replied, his dark eyes never leaving hers. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Lorenzo cupped Elena's face in his hands and kissed her softly, sweetly, while their friends and family applauded. And Elena thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman crouched in a bathroom, how much she'd survived and overcome and rebuilt. She thought about Adrian Falco, locked away in a prison cell where he belonged, unable to hurt anyone ever again. Thought about the women at Casa Giulia who were finding their own paths to freedom and healing. Thought about Dr. Russo's words from so long ago, "You have the power now." And she did. She had power over her own life, her own choices, her own future. She'd reclaimed everything Adrian had tried to steal, and in the process, she'd found something she never expected, a love that didn't diminish her but made her stronger. A partner who supported her dreams instead of crushing them. A future full of possibility instead of fear. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Lorenzo leaned close and whispered, "No regrets?" Elena smiled, looking at the ring on her finger, at the man beside her, at the life they'd built together from the ashes of her worst nightmare. Not a single one. This, us, it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it all started with a wrong number? Especially because it started with a wrong number, Elena corrected. Because that message was meant for someone who couldn't help me, but it reached the one person who could. The one person who would come without hesitation, protect without conditions, and eventually love me in exactly the way I needed to be loved. That wasn't a mistake, Lorenzo. That was fate. Lorenzo pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Then here's to wrong numbers, second chances, and building something beautiful from the broken pieces. Here's to us. To us, Elena echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Years later, Elena would stand at the ribbon, cutting for Casa Giulia's third location, speaking to a much larger crowd about the importance of safe havens for domestic violence survivors. She'd talk about her own experience, about the night she'd sent a desperate message to the wrong number and found salvation. About the man who'd answered that call and eventually became her husband. About turning trauma into purpose and pain into power. And she'd look out at the sea of faces, survivors and supporters, volunteers and donors, and she'd think about how one moment of terror had led to a lifetime of meaning, how the worst night of her life had somehow, impossibly, led to the best years. Because that's what Elena had learned through everything she'd survived, that healing wasn't linear, that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the wrong turn led you exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes the message meant for someone else reached the person who'd change everything. Sometimes survival was just the beginning of the story, not the end. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the man who saved your life became the man who taught you how to truly live. Elena Rossi, now Elena Valenti, had learned all those lessons and more, and she spent the rest of her life passing them on, one rescued woman at a time, one saved life at a time, one wrong number that became absolutely, perfectly right.